Hey everybody, how's it going? My name is Mark Abrams, and we're here for another Puremix live stream. So, welcome. Thank you for tuning in. We're here with the amazing Chris Shaw.
Hey
Chris, how are
everybody.
you doing? Cool, cool. Um, so, Chris has quite a lengthy discography. He's a four-time winning Grammy nom or Grammy Award winning four times engineer and producer. And his credit list is this is going to be an epic name drop list. So we've got everything from Public Enemy, Tribe Called Quest, Run DMC, LL Cool J, to Weezer, the Blue Record, and Wilco, Bob Dylan, Ween, Jeff Buckley, Soul Asylum, Sheryl Crow, Death Cab for Cutie, Lee Reed, and I can't keep going. So that's a pretty epic list. You've been busy.
Yeah, I've been very busy.
Yeah. So I was thinking that today we're going to do some pretty fun stuff. So I was thinking that we could start off with a little bit of an interview, just to
Sure.
get to know you, and then after that we're going to be opening up a session from Now to Surf, and kind of breaking down the Pro Tool session for that. So pretty full and fun day planned ahead. And that song is
Great.
Jules and Jim. So
Mhm.
cool.
Yep.
So yeah, let's start from the top.
All right, let's go.
Cool. So how did you get into engineering?
Uh, I think like most people, I was a musician. I was a guitar player. I played in a lot of shitty cover bands in high school, and I was always the guy recording the rehearsals. I would spend more time setting up a microphone to find the exact spot in the room to pick up everything equally.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was constantly into recording my rehearsals with my band and recording myself. And then when I was about 12, I heard this record by a solo record by the guitar player from King Crimson, Robert Fripp, and
Mm-hmm.
it was my introduction to Frippertronics, which and basically it's just a sound on sound, but it was done with two tape recorders. I couldn't figure out I couldn't do it myself because I didn't own two reel-to-reel tape recorders. So I figured out how to hack it together with a pair of tape decks by literally, taking a tape machine, taking cassettes apart and threading one spool of tape between two cassette shells and then putting them in two different machines and then figuring out how to, patch it up so that, you record on one machine and then tape travels across into the other machine, take the output of
Yeah.
that machine, feed it back into the first, and you get that really long delay. And I would spend days and days in my room with that. And a couple of years later, when I was in high school, I ran into a buddy of mine who was taking recording courses in New York City. And I was like, well, what are you doing that for? And he goes, well, you can get a job as a recording engineer. And I was like, what? People get paid to do this? And so my choices coming out of high school is either to get into computers or get into recording. And I spent 12 years going to a Catholic grammar school and a Catholic high school and wearing suits and ties all the time. The idea of doing that for the rest of my life didn't really appeal to me. So
Yeah.
fortunately, my parents were really supportive, and I went to NYU. And while I was at NYU, I took an internship at this studio in downtown New York called Green Street Recording, and it was primarily a hip hop studio. And at the time, I hated hip hop. I didn't like hip
Right.
hop at all. I was a music snob. But
Yeah.
once I saw how hip hop records are made, technically like sampling, looping, and MIDI and triggering and stuff like that, I just got really enamored with that music just from a purely technical point of view. And it wasn't
Yeah.
probably I was probably doing it for about a year before I started realizing the social aspects of hip hop and what an incredible music genre it was. And, and just as luck would have it, a year after I started at that studio, Public Enemy started working there, and so I became part
Mm.
of a team of engineers that worked with them. You know,
Awesome.
and the rest is well history.
Yeah, man. And then you are now in Austin, correct?
Yeah, about 6 years ago, my wife and I moved to the Austin area so my wife could be closer to her daughter and grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
And that took me a while to get used to. It took about a year of cajoling, But at that point, this was like 2013 or something like that. By that point, 80% of my work was mixing and mixing
Yeah.
from home. So I just realized that I can basically do this anywhere as long as I got a fast internet connection and I'm within driving distance, of a good studio. And
Right.
so I'm out just outside of Austin, this town called Bastrop. It's kind of
Cool.
rural, but it's beautiful. We sold our condo in Brooklyn. I have got a house I paid for in cash, and I got a pool, and massive house. Obviously I got this room,
Yeah.
above my garage to do my thing,
Yeah.
and yeah, that's it.
That's awesome.
I'm loving it.
Yeah.
You know?
That's great. So you at Green Street back in New York,
Hmm.
you started out mostly doing hip hop then, right?
Yeah, almost all only doing hip hop. There was some rock bands that came through. Like the studio owner had this heavy metal band that he produced and kind of guided under his label. This band called Riot. And some people have heard of them, some haven't. And
Hmm.
so I did some rock sessions as well. So when I made the transition, like around 1992 or so, one of the producers for Public Enemy, part of their production team, this guy named Eric Sadler, he kind of encouraged me to go independent.
Hmm.
Like I was working on staff, and that was like the most frightening thing I ever did.
Yeah.
I handed my keys, but he hooked me up with my first manager, and you know, and I was really lucky because around that time, a lot of rock bands wanted to incorporate samples and looping into their music. And back
Right.
then, it was kind of an art.
Yeah.
It's not like today we just drag a loop onto a track and it automatically time stretches it for you. You had to like
Right.
put it into like sample it off a record. You had to edit the front and the end of it, using a
Yeah.
display that only showed you numbers. There's no waveform editing. If you wanted to change the timing of the sample, you basically tuned it slower or faster. You had to figure out how to trigger it, and it was a process and how to shift it back and forth so it lock up with your live drums and stuff. So it was kind of a black art back then.
Totally.
And all of a sudden I was this independent guy who kind of did some rock records, but I also was deeply embedded with all this hip hop stuff. And so I got hired a lot of gigs just because of my association with Public Enemy. In fact, you can point to any artist I've worked with since then, and all roads lead back to Public Enemy, including
Wow.
Bob Dylan. I got the Bob Dylan gig because I'd worked with Public Enemy. You know, that
Awesome.
was the
All right.
deciding factor.
You got to
Yeah.
tell us about that. It's Bob Dylan.
Well,
You
it, well, it, it was weird. I got a phone call from my manager who asked me, like on a Wednesday, he's like, "What are you doing on Sunday?" I'm like, "I don't know. What am I doing on Sunday?" He's like, "Well, you want to work with Bob Dylan for a day?" And my first reaction was, "Why me? Why am I getting this
Hmm.
call? I'm like the last guy you'd probably call for that." But apparently, my name came up. There's a guy at Columbia, this producer, I mean, excuse me, A&R guy named Steve Berkowitz, and he was in charge of Columbia's back catalog label called Legacy. Half of Dylan's catalogs on Legacy that I have on Columbia. And when Bob was coming through town on this tour, he needed some studio time to do a song for a movie soundtrack that he was asked to do. And this guy Steve recommended me because I had worked with a bunch of like singer songwriters like Sean Colvin. I did a bit of work with Jeff Buckley. He gave me this amazing gig years ago with working with Booker T and the MGs. So he was telling Bob's manager like, oh, he's worked with Sean Colvin, he's worked with Jeff Buckley,
Yeah.
and his manager was like, yeah, well, Bob's worked with a million guys like that. What else has he done? He said, well, he also did a lot of hip hop records. He worked with Public Enemy and Tribe Called Quest, and Jeff Rosen, his manager, just said, "Oh, God, I love that band. At the very least, I'll have some great stories. Sure, let's get Chris to do this."
Nice.
And we went in there and we did a song for a day. And it was a song called "Things Have Changed" for this movie called The Wonder Boys.
Hmm.
And literally, the rough mix wound up being the final mix. And it got put in the movie. And 6 months later, he won an Oscar for it. And so I've pretty much been working with him. I haven't worked with him on an album since like 2005, but I'm still heavily involved in all the back catalog. There's like a bootleg series that comes out every year where they go back into his archives and they remix, outtakes and stuff like that. I'm really involved in that. He did a movie on Netflix last year. There was a documentary called The Rolling Thunder Review, and I have a couple of mixes in that as well. So I'm
Awesome.
constantly in contact. And actually, Bob just dropped a song like last week or a few weeks ago. That's actually his first number one ever, and it's a 17-minute long epic. And that was a song we did a while back. I would love to talk about that track, but I've been asked not to.
Okay.
So, yeah, well,
Wow.
like Bob wants to keep it mysterious. He wants to
Yeah.
be like, doesn't want anyone fussing about who played on it or when it was recorded, or so his
Right.
managers just basically said, yeah, you can tell people you worked on it, but that's about it.
Right. Right. Right.
I could definitely say that Bob sang it and he wrote it and I recorded it and mixed it, but that's all I
Yeah.
can say.
Bob was definitely in front of a microphone.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so Bob Dylan, I know that a lot of people in the chat have a ton of questions about the Blue album from Weezer as well.
Yeah.
So how do you go? Was Bob Dylan pre or post Weezer?
Way pre. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
How did I get that job? Um, I used to do a lot of work at Electric Lady in New York, and the very first record I did there was this band from New Jersey called the Sweet Lizard Iltet, which
Hmm.
nobody's heard of, but they were sort of like this, like imagine if you crossed Nine Inch Nails with like the Red Hot Chili Peppers. They're like this industrial funk band and very progressive and radical vegetarians. Everything was very political and everything. And they wound
Mm-hmm.
up cramming 48 tracks worth of material onto a single reel of tape. And it was a really complex mix. And we did it on a like one of the only Focusrite consoles that were built of this certain type. Um, and Mary Campbell, the studio owner, which, studio manager, would come in every once in a while, make sure everything was okay, and I'd play her the mix, and she really loved it. And a few months later, Rick Ocasek, singer-songwriter from the Cars,
Mm-hmm.
called her up and said, "I've got a solo record I need to mix. I'm looking for somebody new to do it. Who do you know that's doing cool things now?" She said, "Well, this guy Chris just mixes an interesting record. Maybe you should work with him." So I was in Seattle making a record with a band, and the phone rang in the studio, and I picked it up, and it's like, "Hi, it's Rick Ocasek. Do you want to mix a record for me?" And I hung up on him because I thought it was somebody in the band, like making, giving
Doing
me,
a joke.
like,
Yeah.
trying to play a prank on me. And 5 minutes later, he called again. He's like, "Why'd you hang up on me?" And I looked around, and all the guys in the band were in the room. I was like, "Oh shit, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do that." A couple of weeks later, I'm at his house, and he's half of the record is like pop, and the other half of the record was like this experimental. He wanted me to mix the experimental side. Mike Shipley, who did like old Def Leppard records, had mixed the other side of the record.
Yeah.
And I went to his house, and he had 7 songs ready to go. He only wanted to put 6 on there. He picked 5, and there were 2 left over, and he wanted me to pick the 6th song, which was a big honor. I was like, "You want me to pick the song?" He's like, "Yeah, sure, you figure it out." And so we did. I mixed that for him, and then 2 months later, he calls me up and he's like, "Hey, there's this band called Weezer wants me to do this record. You want to do it with me?" He said, "Why don't you come over? I'll play you the demos." I went back to his house, and he played me the demos. And while he was playing them, I think I was laughing more than anything else because I was like, "My God, these guys are such fucking geeks," And the songs are just really
Yeah.
nerdy, and it was really
Yeah.
simple, and like I totally identified it because I'm a fucking geek myself.
Mm-hmm.
And next thing I know, the band flew out to New York, and we rehearsed with them for a couple of days, and we recorded those rehearsals, and we made the record. Nobody knew
Yeah.
how big that record was going to be. I don't think I had a sense of how big that record would be until we were in the mixing stage, and we used to leave the door open a crack in the control room, and there was a receptionist down the hall. And at the end of the night, I was walking at the door, and the receptionist was like singing the songs to herself. She's like singing Buddy Holly, to herself. I was
Right.
like, this thing might have legs.
Right.
And even the guys in the band were like, "Oh yeah, we'll sell 15,000, and that the label's going to drop us." And that's
Right.
actually what happened. They sold 15,000 or so, and then they released the second video for Buddy Holly, and that was it. They just
Right.
fucking blew up, and
Yeah.
yeah, it was huge. So
And
yeah, and the reason why I got the Sweet Lizard Il Tet gig, which got me the Rick Ocasek gig, is because Il Tet loved me because I'd worked at Public Enemy. So
that's
again, there's
amazing.
this
Yeah.
line that always goes back to it. I
Right.
mean, I try not to talk about it too much because I don't want Chuck D calling me up and asking for a profit
Right.
share or something like that.
Right. 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 Yeah. Yeah.
So
Give me all of that money
yeah,
that you
give me all of
got
your
for the
money.
free webinar that you just did. Yeah. So everybody kind of has a story like that, which is pretty interesting. Like Fab,
Mm-hmm.
he traces everything back to one meeting with the session drummer that introduces him to so many people. And the same
Right.
thing, he's like, I got this record because of this person with this record, and all of it goes back to this one person. And yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
really interesting, like how that stuff kind of goes.
Yep.
Pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, literally every. I mean, and it all goes back to like the whole music business thing too. Like you can't really burn any bridges or say no, especially when you're starting out. You can't say no to anything
Right.
because one thing leads to the other, leads to the next.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, and like I was very lucky. I just happened to work at a studio that Public Enemy worked at. I just happened to fall in on a couple sessions that were big, but a few years ago, I read somewhere, I heard somebody say that being lucky is basically the intersection of ability and opportunity, you know,
Right.
and not realizing I was happy to be at the right place. I just happened to have just enough talent to
Yeah.
to come in. Every time my career has gone forward a little bit, it's because I took a chance. Like I did something that I wasn't too sure if I could do it, but I did it anyway. I always ask myself, well, if I do this, what's the worst thing that can happen? And 90% of the time, it's something you can totally recover from. So just go ahead and take a chance. Like when the first thing I did for Public Enemy, it was a rough mix I had done for the band late one night because Rick Rubin needed a copy because he was doing a movie and he wanted to hear the song and figure out where he was going to put it in the movie. And I did this rough mix in half an hour. Like I hardly knew what I was doing. I mean, I knew what I was doing, but I wasn't a seasoned mixer at all. I was just an assistant
Right.
engineer. And after the record was done, and I think two other engineers did serious mixes, of that same song. And when we were sequencing the record together, the band listened to both of the new mixes, and Hank was like, "Yeah, I got this cassette, this rough that Chris did. Let's listen to it." And he listened to it. And he went, "Yeah, it's actually not a really good mix. It's way too trebly. There's no bottom end. It's annoying, but it works for the song.
Hmm.
It's too bad he only gave me a cassette of it because I would love to use it on the record." And I was like, "Well, wait a second. I actually have it on a piece of shop tape over here just in case." And I just happen to have it. Bang! I get my first major label credit. For
Nice.
a
Yeah.
rough mix I did in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And
That's
so
amazing. What a
yeah.
story.
So like it's all a matter of just, I mean, people ask me all the time, well, how do I break out? How do I like wind up, how do I get myself in that kind of position? Well, you gotta, again, opportunity and ability. If you're not in a spot where that opportunity is going to come by, it's never going to come by. So if you want to be
Right.
a hip hop engineer, move to a city where hip hop records are being made, work
Right.
at a studio where hip hop records are being made, because you're not, unless you've got a really great localized music scene, that does hip hop,
Yeah.
you're never gonna have the opportunity.
Right. Right. Yeah. Where are you from originally?
New York.
New
I
York.
grew
Okay.
up in just above the Bronx in Westchester County. There's a town called Pelham. I grew up in Pelham, New York. And
Cool.
so when I was going to NYU, what really helped my situation was I was going to NYU interning at Green Street, but I was still living at home with my mom and dad. I would commute in every day. It was only like a half-hour train ride every day.
Yeah.
So that was a huge part. If I didn't have that backup or that support from my parents, then none of this would have happened. Not that my
Right.
parents were rich by any stretch of imagination. They both worked two jobs.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they put me through college, and so they were a little wary at first, but I think once I got my first gold record, and they were like, okay, this is actually pretty legit.
Seems like a thing. Yeah. Right.
It's
Right.
not a thing.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's amazing. Support system is such a huge factor in all of it, right?
Yeah,
Like,
it is. It
yeah,
really is.
yeah,
You can't do without it.
yeah. Tell me a little bit about that moment where you decided to go independent. Like, what had happened up to that point, and what was
I was
sort
on
of the catalyst?
staff. I think I was making like $15 an hour if I was engineering. I think assistants only. I think we only made $5 or $10 an hour. And this is back in
Mm.
'87 through like '92, so like a little 5 year period. And wasn't that much money. But basically, I started having my own clients. There were like certain hip hop producers and engineers and rock guys who would book the room because I was there.
Mm-hmm.
But I really didn't know that. I just thought they liked working at the studio. The studio was a great place to hang. It was like a basement studio. It had one live room and two control rooms looking into it, and
Oh, cool.
one room was really a mixed room, and it had its own ISO booth, and then there's only one lounge. So we would literally have like guys like Arif Martin working on the Aretha Franklin track in Studio B,
Yeah.
and Public Enemy working in Studio A, but there's only one lounge. So when everyone took a dinner break, you had Arif Martin sitting right next to Chuck D, sitting right next to whoever. And I remember during that same session, I was assisting Arif, and all of a sudden the door flew open, and Flavor Flav, in all his glory, came flying in. He's like, Arif Martin, yo, gee, I got all your records. And I'm sitting there, like, oh my God, no, this is like the worst thing that could have happened. And I finally pushed him out the room, and I looked at Arif, and I was like, I'm so sorry, like I didn't mean it to happen. And he just kind of looked at me and went, he can come here anytime he wants.
Nice.
He was so great about it. And so that's the reason why like Chuck D wound up on a Sonic Youth record, because Sonic Youth and PE were in the room at the same time.
Yeah. Right.
But one night, Eric Sadler and I went out for a beer, and we were just sitting there talking. He looked at me and said, "Hey man, where do you see yourself in 5 years?" I'm like, "I don't know. I'm probably right here doing my thing." He's like, "Man, maybe you should go independent." I'm like, "Why?" He said, "Because people come down to work with you, not because of the studio." I'm like, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, man, so and so works with you, and this guy works with you. I know because do you notice they only work here when you're the engineer?" I'm like, "Oh, that's true." He's like, I got somebody who can manage you if you want. It was like, so he hooked me up with my first manager, and it was scary. I think the first
Yeah.
6 months work was very sketchy, but then a couple projects came through, and it just kind of took off. I think
Yeah.
once I got to basically what it was, I went independent, and one of the first records I did was Soul Asylum, this album called Grave Dancers Union. It had the their hit song "Runaway Train" on it.
Yeah.
And Michael Beinhorn got my name because his wife actually was an A&R person for this label, and she was trying to get me to produce a record for this band called Too Much Joy, and the label wasn't into it because I had no production credit whatsoever, and this was sort of like their make or break record. They had done 3 records that hadn't taken off, and they were like, "You should go with an experienced guy," you know.
Yeah.
So I didn't get the gig, but my discography was sitting like on on the kitchen table or something like that in Michael's apartment, and he kind of picked it up and he went, "Oh wow, this guy's done some rock. Oh, he's worked a Public Enemy. Oh, let me get this guy to do the Soul Sound record," because Michael likes
Wow.
he loves experimenting with things, and he's like one of the guys who'll put like 20 things on a mic on a signal chain to get a weird sound, and he wanted to work
Right.
with somebody who wasn't afraid of experimenting, and I got that gig out of the blue, you know. And then shortly after that, I got Weezer, and that basically was sort of like my 2 calling cards, you know, 3
Yeah.
calling cards: Public Enemy, Weezer, Soul Asylum, and bang,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
This
That's
is back
great.
when that's back when albums had budgets, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. You couldn't go anywhere. I mean, Weezer, half of your credit list is like this, but you could not go anywhere without hearing that record. I remember when that one came out too.
Yeah, it was nuts.
Hmm.
I was actually out of town. I was living in New York City, and I was out of state working on another record, and I got back to New York right after it had hit, and like you couldn't get away from it. I was just like, I was kind of freaked out, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
You're
was it was crazy, and they're a
That's great.
great bunch of guys to work with, you know.
Nice. Yeah. How long did the Weezer record take? It was a week, you
I
said, or two?
no, we did that probably in about 2 months, maybe three.
Okay. Yeah.
We did all Electric Lady. We did some vocal overdubs and guitar overdubs at Rick Ocasek's place, his basement studio,
Hmm.
and that was a lot of fun too because we'd be hanging out with Rick, and Rick had all his gear there, you know. And I would like pick up like he had this gorgeous like pink Fender Mustang, and I was just sitting there noodling on it. He says, "Hold on a second." He grabbed the guitar cord, he plugged it in, and he plugged it right into the console, and turned it up. And he said, "Play Best Friend's Girl." And I started playing Best Friend's Girl, and all of a sudden like that sound, like exactly that direct
Yeah.
came. It's like, yeah, we did that direct, and he would
Oh,
like
no
show
way.
us how he wrote songs, and Rivers and I would be just sort of sitting at each other like grinning at each other like school kids, you know, because I
So cool.
worshipped guitars when I was a kid, and
Yeah.
so did he. And so,
Yeah.
and Rick was so generous with his time and advice. You know, he was a great guy to work with. You
That's awesome. Very cool. Okay, so how long did it take from the time that you started, I don't know, making records, period,
know?
until you were like, I like the sound of the records that I make?
Um, I hate everything I do. Well, especially shortly after I finish it. You know, it takes me a while to like I have to step back from every project I work on for about a month, just so I can
Hmm.
forget the details, you know, and then I'll
Right.
put it on, listen to it again, like, oh yeah, that's actually pretty good, you know. Um, when did I first think that I knew what I was doing? Basically, is what you're asking.
Yeah, I mean, when was the first time that you listened back to a record that you made and you were like, maybe I got this?
Yeah, well, I didn't mix the Soul Song record. That was Andy Wallace, but that was a big treat. You know, I got that back.
Oh
I
my
went, oh
gosh.
my god, my records
Yeah.
can sound good.
Yeah.
um, I don't know. It happens gradually, I think. You know,
Hmm.
but like I remember when I finished the Weezer record, going into mastering with George Marino that afternoon. I remember I hated it. I remember the night before I had listened to a CD of it that we had burned, and I wanted to mix the whole thing over again. I was just like, oh, I hate it, I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. And then we went to
Yeah.
mastering, and I watched George EQ it and do his thing to it. And he didn't do a lot, you know, a dB here and there, you know, a couple dB cuts here, nothing really
Hmm.
drastic.
Yeah.
And then when I got it home, and he basically glued it all together, you know, and made it sound like a real contiguous piece. And when I got home and I listened to that CD, I was like, oh my god, all right, I guess I maybe I do know what I'm doing. It's
Yeah.
mastering. That's what I'm
Yeah.
missing, you know. And
Nice.
it's really different now because people expect when you send a client a mix, they want to hear it like what it's going to sound like when it's done. You know, which they want to hear it as the final product.
Right.
Whereas back then, you could kind of get away with doing a mix and the client being like, well, it could be a little brighter, it could be a little louder, but yeah, mastering will take care of it. Back then, you know, people kind of knew that there was one more step to go.
Right.
Uh, Whereas
Hmm.
these days, you know, you do a rough mix, you got to slam it, and you got to
Yeah.
limit it, and
Right.
otherwise, you know, people think that you don't know what you're doing. You know, but
Yeah.
fortunately, I get to work with artists who've been around a while, and I can do a rough mix, and they'll be like, well, you know, it could be a little brighter, but yeah, that's a mastering thing. You know.
Right, right, right. Yeah, well, I mean, another thing back then too was that was a console mix, so We could
Hmm.
go recall that, but it's going to be very labor intensive and expensive,
Right. Yeah.
and then they'd be
Well,
like, all
yeah,
right, let's
that's
go to
what I love
mastering.
about mixing in a box. I kind of switched over to being in the box around 2011 or so.
Cool.
And what I love about it is, yeah, you can recalls are really fast, but for me, psychologically, I could be working on the mix and be really like after like 5 hours, be like, oh God, if I hear this song one more goddamn time, I'm gonna kill somebody. And you can just
Right.
hit save, and you can open up another track and work on it. Or even if you're exhausted and you don't feel like making any decisions, you can at least like open up another song and prep it.
Right.
Get all your arrange everything, get all your samples together, your MIDI triggers, whatever, and arrange things and just get ready to mix. I'm a one man
Right.
operation. I don't have an assistant or anything.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
I, I, I have to schedule my time in such a way that optimizing my day. Like
Right.
I'll mix from like 10:30 or so till about dinner time, and then after dinner I'll come in and I'll prep the next mix because I can do that
Mm.
with on a pair of crappy computer speakers at really quiet volumes,
Yeah.
because this is my house,
Yeah.
and my wife comes home at 6 o'clock, so I can't be like cranking and blasting stuff. So I learned how to take my schedule and just basically optimize it for working.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. How long does it usually take you to mix a song?
Depends on how.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's really well recorded, mixes can come together like really fast. Like anywhere between 4 to 6 hours.
Right.
If I'm getting something that from a band that's been self-recorded and there's issues, I mean, it can probably take 2 days sometimes.
Right.
And not two nonstop continuous days. Like a lot of times I'll open up a session, I'll listen to it, and I'll be like, okay, this is rough. I'm gonna have to re-trigger all these drums. I got to tune all these vocals. I got all this stuff I got to do. Let's just prep it because
Right.
spending 4 hours prepping the mix and then diving straight into the same song, you're just exhausted. I
Yeah.
rather um, I'll open up all the songs and assess them and see what condition they're in, and I'll be like, okay, well, everything here is going to need a bit of work. So let me prep. Let me spend 2 days. I'm just going to prep like half the record. I'm not
Right.
going to mix it. I'm just going to open up every session and get everything organized and get my drum triggers going and tune vocals and just kind of get it to the point where I can start mixing. And that's
Right.
that's mind numbing work to do. So I'll do that for like 4 days. Then
Yeah.
basically by the fifth
Yeah.
day, the band's call me up and they go, dude, what's up? 4 days. You haven't heard anything yet. Like, don't worry,
Yeah.
it's coming. And they'll come
Right.
fast and furious after that. I'll get like two mixes a day or a mix and a half a day.
Right. Yeah, because you kind of have things set up. You found the tone of
Yeah,
the record, and now you're
exactly.
moving.
I'll,
Yeah.
I'll get everything prepped and I'll just kind of do a faders up, static mix and just so I can get an idea. And I'll make notes, I have like a little note program that I use. I just like type in a whole bunch of notes, what it is I want to do so I don't forget them. And then I just hit it, go through
Yeah.
it.
Awesome. Cool. So chat room, there's a section below the video that says ask a question. You
Mm-hmm.
guys can submit all your questions right there. And then as we're going, Frank is our community manager and he's moderating the chat room today.
Mm-hmm.
So Frank's going to be sending me questions to ask for Chris that you guys upvote in there. We're
Mm-hmm.
also going to have some polls that are happening below the video. So make sure you guys check out those two sections down there and we'll go through it from there. But what do you say that we dive into this Not a Surf session?
Oh, okay, sure. Let's see.
Cool.
Should we play the song first, or do we just dive
Yeah,
in?
yeah, I think that's good. Let's pull up your screen share and then we'll play the song down
Okay,
for
share
everybody to hear.
screen. Here we go. This will be fun. There we go.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about this song and the record before we get going on it?
Okay, well, this is a song by a band called Not a Surf called Jules and Jim. I did this back in 2011. Um, let's see, and my Pro Tools rig at the time was very, very modest to say the least. We did it actually, let me just show some pictures here just so you can get an
Cool.
idea. This is the control room we worked at. This is a place in Brooklyn called Headgear, which is no longer there. It's based around a Trident 80 console. Um, this is basically the tracking room we did it in, which is pretty small, but it sounded awesome on drums. Side note, Ira, the drummer, is a massive Ringo fan, so he collects all
Oh
these old
man,
Ludwig sets, including like the old cymbal stands that are really flimsy and stuff like that. And
this is great.
so
Yeah.
he was down into it. And here's a kind of a close up of kind of how I mic'd it. You kind of
Mm-hmm.
can't really. Unfortunately, it's the only picture I have of the kit. I have no idea what that mic is. So
That
if anybody
is,
knows,
I think it's a Corby. Does
yeah,
that
that sounds
sound right?
about right. And
Yeah.
then we got D112 here down at the bottom, and we got a a subwoofer from an NS10 hanging off a mic stand, and um, I'm a big fan of 414s on toms. We had one on the
Mm.
floor. I mean, we had like this is like an Audio Technica something up here
Mm-hmm.
on the toms, and standard 57 on top, whatever on the bottom.
Yeah.
If I go back to the tracking, yeah, I had a pair of 452s above the
Mm-hmm.
kit and a mono Coles mic right above the snare drum.
Oh,
And
nice.
whatever they had lying around for room mics is what I use for room mics. I don't, unfortunately don't
Mm-hmm.
have it. And the band all played together in the room while tracking. Amps were in ISOs.
Yeah.
Let's see. Um, and then we took the files over to the bass player's house. Daniel Lorca has a
Mm-hmm.
loft, or had a loft in Brooklyn, and that used to be a recording studio at one point. So
Hmm.
this is a picture of me sitting there working on a guitar part for an overdub, but this is basically what used to be the live room. And then we took the small control room and turned it into an overdub booth. And here's like the bass rig. He had this really awesome sounding Marshall bass rig, which when I first
Mm-hmm.
saw it, I was like, oh my God, this is going to sound like hell. But it actually
Yeah.
sounded great.
Wow.
Um, the other guitar player in the band, this is Matthew Cause, the lead singer,
Mm-hmm.
songwriter, guitar player. Obviously doing acoustic guitar overdub 414. This is a B&K 4011. That's my
Mm-hmm.
go-to acoustic guitar setup. This guitar amp setup over here belongs to Doug Gillard, who is the guitar player for Guided by Voices, but he's also a member of Not a Surf on and off, and that's kind of his rig.
Cool. Yeah.
And not only guys in the band, great people to hang out with, but Daniel, whose studio this was, he's also an amazing cook. Every day he
Yeah.
was making like
Wow.
incredible food. We had like ramen and like dumplings and black bean soup, and then like
Oh,
at the
man.
very last day of the session, he we invited a bunch of people over for playback, and he made this massive tangine, with
Wow.
lamb and couscous. There were like 30 of us there, and there was still leftovers.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
but basically, this was the setup we used for overdubs. This is a
Mm-hmm.
2000. This is in 2011. This is a 2006 laptop with just two cores in it. Okay, it's
Mm.
a ridiculously underpowered rig, but it actually worked.
Yeah.
And over here, we bought an Apogee Ensemble interface Thunder Firewire from Sweetwater. The whole idea is we were going to buy it and then we were going to return it 45 days later because
Mm-hmm.
Sweetwater had this great return policy. But the record went long, and
Yeah.
it went long, and they actually owed me a little bit of money after the session was over. So the band just basically gave me the
Oh,
ensemble as
cool.
payment to finish
Yeah.
it, which is great. I still use that interface to this day. It's still my main interface. It sounds wonderful.
Nice.
Um, and then I was having problems with FireWire on that rig because I'm driving not only the hard drives, but I'm also driving the interface, and I was getting all kinds of hiccups. But these old laptops had what they called an express card slot on the side, and it's just this little thing that you stick in, and it had two eSATA ports. So I was running the drives on a completely different bus, so
Mm.
it totally freed up bandwidth, and I was actually getting a lot more out of this rig than I should have.
Yeah.
Let's see what else. And this was basically my console over here for the overdubs. I had a pair of Daking mic pre EQs and a pair of distressors that just patched straight into Pro Tools.
Oh,
And basically
nice.
all the bass overdubs, all the vocal overdubs, all the guitar overdubs was basically technically done on a Daking console. You know,
Nice. Not a bad
let's see.
chain there. Very
And
cool.
in this song we're going to play for you, we had a guy by the name of Joe McGinty. We went over to his place to do some keyboard overdubs. Um, and the main keyboard we used on it was this huge modular Moog.
Oh, man.
Um,
Nice.
and actually, the song opens with a note from that.
Mm.
And let's see, what else do I got here? And then this is the room. This is my apartment in Brooklyn that I mixed it in. This is actually a ridiculously glamorized shot because we were selling the apartment at the time, and this was a photo that like a professional photographer took for
It
the
looks
listing.
pretty beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
That's great.
Look at how well lit it is,
Yeah.
Of
Right.
course, And then
Yeah.
the photographer ran over and grabbed one of my Grammys and put it on the desk because he thought it might sell the apartment faster. I don't know, but
Nice.
I built all these, all the sound absorption and bass chops myself,
Mm-hmm.
and then
You
this
know,
was the
I
setup I this was the setup that I used for mixing it. Matthew also had an artist mix, an old one from Euphonics, and it's straddling the top of that, my computer, and I use a large scale, keyboard to control everything. And
yeah.
at the time, I was using this Novation Nocturne with Automap to control my plugins, but and I actually still use this controller for other things, but not for
Yeah.
Automap because Automap isn't compatible anymore.
Ah.
Versions of Pro Tools, so that's a bummer.
Oh man.
But let me just continue on. This is the space I'm in now. So
Mm-hmm.
you actually see the back half and the camera, but it's very
Yeah.
simple. I'm in the box. I used to have like 4 racks full of gear. They used to cart with me everywhere, but after a
Mm-hmm.
while, it was just like I'm not using this stuff. So let me just keep the stuff that I'm using and rack it up and sell the other stuff. And so I got like an
Mm.
ARP 2600 over here that I bought in Australia. This is my
Beautiful.
dad's Whirly that he bought brand new.
Oh,
This is like an
nice.
old Ensoniq ESQ1 that I got back in like 93 or something like that. And I got a pair of Genelecs, a pair of NS10s, and down there is my
Amazing.
Hackintosh. You know,
Yeah.
uh,
Nice.
really really simple. It's the room is really flat, despite the fact that the ceilings are like angled in and vaulted. You know,
Right.
there's a real narrow sweet spot right there where my chair is,
Right.
and
Right.
it works. And I got a great view outside my window. You know,
Yeah.
it's wonderful.
That looks
And
beautiful.
this is basically a close-up shot of my setup. You know, I got a pair of
Yeah.
monitors. I prefer to have my monitors over under. You know, and I
Mm.
put the mixer. Actually, they're switched in this picture, but I usually have the edit screen up on top and all my plugins running on the bottom. I just
Mm.
replaced that artist mix like 2 weeks ago with a new S1. This is
Mm.
the old transport I still use. And I still use this Novation. I actually use this with a couple in conjunction with a couple of plugins as a monitor controller and a speaker
Mm.
switcher. I can get into that later if you want. And I
Awesome.
swapped out my Genelecs with a old pair of Alesis monitors just because they have a little more bottom end. But
Mm-hmm.
occasionally I switch back and forth to the whatchamacallit, the NS10s. And
Yeah.
let's see what
Yeah.
else. And there's a close up shot. I got this wicked cool backlit keyboard I really like. And
Okay. Wait. Wait.
oh
Wait. Go back to the keyboard. This
yeah.
keyboard looks amazing. How mad
uh,
would people be if we just focused on the keyboard right for like 5 minutes?
absolutely.
Yeah.
The keyboard is actually pretty cool. What I like about this keyboard, besides the fact that it's backlit,
Yeah.
it's like $60 off of Amazon. It's made by this company called Aukey. Is I have a program called Controller Mate, which is like this
Mm-hmm.
really, it's actually a pretty complex program, but it basically takes any input device that you can hook up to your computer, and you can remap all your keys and all your mouse keys and your mouse controllers to do whatever you want per um, whatchamacallit, per program. So if you look really carefully on these F keys, you can see this has some labels on the sides here. And
Yeah.
the one on the F12 key says denoise, right? Hit shift in that key, it'll call up isotope RX. If I hit
Oh
shift in this
man.
key here, it'll call up the Massey DRT. If I hit this key, it'll pop up the window for auto tune and a whole bunch of stuff. You know, and I've got
Okay.
all my key
Yeah.
that I can actually transmit MIDI with this keyboard if I want, if I hold down certain keys. So I try to
Amazing.
have basically right everything you see right there can handle sessions that are massive, in a
Wow.
very convenient way.
Yeah.
So let me
Yeah.
get rid of all these pictures.
Well,
I'm sure you guys want to.
let's go back to that for 1 second, and
What?
I totally want to geek out with you later on
Um,
about the macro stuff on your keyboard.
oh,
Um,
okay. Yeah, it's convoluted. We'll get into that, but I can spend 6 hours talking about that.
yeah, same here, and
Um,
yeah, I'll talk to you after the show. But the one thing to focus on there, though, like, can you just kind of talk about how important that is for you that you have these things at the a quick touch instead of going into the menu and
oh
scrolling every
God,
time that you need
yeah.
that and
Well, let me pull this away for a second. I mean,
sure.
obviously, quick, knowing your Pro Tools soft keys is really, really, really important.
Yeah.
You know, my most often used one is like Option A.
Mm-hmm.
Which I'm sorry. Yeah, Option A. I'm on the wrong. There we go. Option A, which it fits the entire session, horizontally into into the window. That to me is
Yeah.
just like one of my most important functions. But
Yeah.
being able to just like hit a keystroke and have like for example, like certain windows pop up, like let's see
Yeah.
what else can I bring up here, like DRT. I already got that up there. By no tracks are record enabled. Hello. By denoising. Oh, why it's not working.
Well, we're kind of like messing with your system a lot to make the
Yeah,
broadcast
actually, know what
happen
it
here,
is?
but
We're looking at my top window, and I have
yeah.
everything's programmed to pop up on my lower monitor, so you're not seeing it,
Right.
but it's all there. All these things
Yeah.
are popping up.
Nice. Yeah. That's
But
that's
having
amazing
having
though. It's
shortcuts to me are important. And like for example, I got the Avid Control app, and I have a whole bunch of things that on one page I use all the time. Let's
Yeah.
see, I'll call that up over here. Um, I'll get
While you're
myself to.
bringing that up, it's just I think it's like worth noting that this is a really great time to kind of like work on your systems and
Yeah,
and
oh
get this
yeah,
stuff ready.
tweak.
For
Yeah, tweak your. I probably at least once a week will sit down and ask myself, well, is there one more thing I can like automate, or one more thing I
yeah,
can make quick key that'll make my life really fast.
yeah,
So, for example,
yeah.
like you can't see me touching them, but like I can view my instrument parameters, and I can open up all the stuff on the side really fast.
Mm-hmm.
Using the hello. Yeah, I can do I can open. Wow, it's doing weird things right now. I have to
It's
know why, because I'm not on the program. That's why. Hold on.
yeah, and the Zoom
The
remote
the
control
window
thing
keeps
making
switching over to Zoom,
right.
but I can show and hide all the columns on the side. I can change. I have a button
Mm-hmm.
that automatically sets my rulers the way I want them. I can turn faders on and off so that I don't hear the faders on my
Yep.
controller moving up and down when I'm listening
Yeah.
critically to a fade or something like that. I can show all tracks. I can hide inactive tracks. I can hide my MIDI tracks. On another page, um, for example, let me bring that up. Let's see. Boom, 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 boom.
Yeah, and we're not just geeking out here. This is the stuff that helps you continue to move at the speed of creativity instead of stopping to
Like
go
one thing
and
I do all the time in Pro Tools is let me hide this for a second. Is I use my memory locations for showing and hiding tracks.
yeah.
Okay, so if I pull this up here, you'll see down here there's memory locations called drums, bass, electric guitars, acoustic guitars, vocals, keys,
Mm-hmm.
masters, which are my subgroups, and then all tracks. And so when you click on them, okay, there's my drums, there's my
Yeah.
bass tracks, there are my electric guitar tracks, here are my acoustic guitar tracks, vocals, keys, my masters, and then
Yep.
back to all my tracks in the song. You know,
Yeah.
but I don't actually. I mean, I have a page in the artist control that does that, but
Mm-hmm.
I hardly ever use it because I do it all with the numeric key, the keyboard on the keyboard. So
Yeah.
I want to call up my drums. That's well, let me put that back up. That's memory location 87.
Yeah.
My bass is 90. So they're my bass tracks, my electric guitar tracks. I mean, I'm doing this. I'm not even looking at the keyboard.
Right. Right.
Just, I'm just, I'm,
Yeah.
I got muscle memory and it's just doing it.
Yeah. And thanks for setting up Keycaster. You guys can see in the lower left on his screen, it's broadcasting his keystroke, so you can kind of learn those commands too while he's doing it. Um, that's a huge thing though, because a lot of people don't realize that memory locations are even called memory locations. They think that they're called markers, and you can
Yep.
store all kinds of stuff. Like I have my mix bus chain is stored to a window configuration that I recall with a memory
Mhm.
location and all that.
And that's really funny.
Yeah.
That's the one thing I don't use. I don't use window configurations at all. And everyone tells me I'm
Mm,
missing out, but I really should be
it's
doing
fun.
that.
It's
But
it's a
just
really
being
similar to what you're doing though, with like you're
yeah,
already
but
like
like
bringing stuff up
I
and
yeah,
yeah.
and it's part of my template. I think like
Mm-hmm.
once I started mixing from home and working on Pro Tools, once somebody showed me show high tracks, it just became indispensable because
Yeah.
if I got this song is actually relatively small. I mean, what we
Right.
got something like including all my bus masters. It says 75 tracks, but there's only like
It's a
maybe
lot of buses. Yeah.
45 audio tracks. But I've
Mm-hmm.
done stuff where I've been handed, 100 audio tracks and having to scroll down to find your bass track or having to scroll up to, find your drum tracks is a pain.
Such a time
Another thing
waster.
that's
Yeah.
really a big part of my flow too, is being able to find stuff in the track list here on the side. If you notice, I got these like right here on the top where it says
Mm,
drums. I got these MIDI tracks that don't do anything and they're hidden in the
right.
session, but they say dash 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 drums, and all my drum tracks are underneath that. Then I have another divider here where all my bass
Brilliant.
tracks are, another one for my rhythm guitars, another one for my acoustic guitars. So if
Yeah.
I have to go find a track, instead of having to scroll and look at the name of everything, all
Yeah.
I do is I just look at the tracks that have dashes on it, and
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, where's my bass track? It's right here. And if I want to
Awesome.
get to it really fast, if you hold down Control and Shift and just click on the first bass track, it automatically scrolls it to the very top track in the session.
Right.
And I can go
Right.
down to where the Moog is and click on that. And there's the Moog. And if I want to
Yeah.
go to my background vocals, there's my background vocal tracks. So if I don't use memory locations, that's another way of zipping around your session real
Yeah.
fast.
Oh man.
Um, but yeah, the memory locations
Pretty
thing
cool.
is just critical. Being able to zip around your session like super fast is super
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
That it saves hours and hours of time. And by the way, your finger muscles get great. If I was left-handed, it'd be
Right.
great for guitar playing, but my
Right.
finger picking is super good now.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Because you're flying around. Is
all right,
is
so
all
shall
that
we?
stuff stored in your template, like you said?
Yeah, I have a
Yeah.
template, and I just I used to import my template into the artist track, but
Mm-hmm.
these days I do the other way around. I open up my template and then import all the stuff from the artist into that.
Mm.
I import the session I'm mixing into my template.
Right.
One half dozen the other. I find that importing the song from the band into my template works a little faster.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Oh man. Yeah, we could geek out on this stuff for hours probably. So,
Yeah,
yeah. Shall we listen to the song?
absolutely. So
Cool.
yeah, that big Moog modular actually opens the track. So let me
Cool.
you know, I'll scroll around while the track is going on, so you can kind of see what's going on.
Great.
All right.
That is great. Awesome. It's so fun to hear it and see the session and everything. Big fan of this record. I saw them when they were touring on it. Um, yeah. So I saw when you were scrolling through there
Mm-hmm.
some tracks that were labeled CS guitar.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure I turn my mic back on.
Yeah, you're good.
CS
Yep.
guitar, yeah. Well, as because I produced a record, I get to play on it. So,
Cool. Yeah.
um, well, we could talk about the guitars a bit. I can kind of get it. Can I talk and play this at the same time, without getting too much?
Uh, let's try it.
Well, I'll turn my monitors down a little, quite
Okay.
low in here. So, let's see. Let me get the acoustic guitars up here. Yeah. So Matthew is a great guitar player. He does all kinds of really great open voicings, and he's not much. I wouldn't say he's a great guitar player. He's not like a lead flashy guitar player. He's very strummy
Hmm.
and stuff like that. And so those are two main guitars. Matthew on the left and Doug Gillard on the left. I mean on the right. But Doug kept on playing this little part in his thing. This little. There's a little down, and I could not get that to speak very clearly. So one of the first things I did was I did an acoustic guitar overdub, like literally the day I was mixing, to kind of emphasize that. And that's just like my crappy Ovation guitar that I've had since I was 13 years old, totally detuned to kind of sound like an ethnic kind of thing, like lots of doubled strings and stuff like that. So it would kind of complement what Doug was doing on his part there.
Yeah.
And then let's see, what else did I do? Oh, CS guitar, this one over here. I think this is the part of the song where there's like a little instrumental break. And that's just me.
Cool. Yeah.
So that goes along. That basically is there to kind of help out the bass line too, because Daniel played this really cool, little. I just wanted to make sure that's heard and like it winds up being a thing,
Yeah.
And that's really all I did. Let's see, what else
That's
did I
great.
do?
Well, that's a lot though. I mean, you accentuated a lot of the big melody moments in the song there.
Yeah, and the bass recording was kind of cool. We took a DI obviously, and then we also ran his. Actually, did we use this? There's like another bass amp to the side with a Sans amp attached to it.
Cool.
Just to get some more bottom end. And this is probably just the second mic I had in that same amp. And then there was another amp that was just fully blown out and distorted. Hello. So combined with and this is actually a trick I learned from Cheap Trick of all things. Tom Peterson, Cheap Trick, runs his bass through 3 amps. He's got an Ampeg B15, which is just nothing but bottom end and nice round tone. A high watt guitar amplifier, which is clean and loud, but it's nothing but that pick scrape noise. And the other one's like this old Rickenbacker amp that's just fully decked and completely distorted, and a DI. So you had 4 tracks of bass to deal with. And basically you just change the balance of each one during the mix to emphasize, the chorus. So like when the chorus would come in, I would just raise up the overblown, guitar, bass amp, and then pull it back down. And that way your bass amp just kind of bass sound evolves over the course of the song. That's what I tried to do with this thing.
Yeah. Great trick.
And then I'm also not afraid of using, shit tons of plugins on stuff too, because all these guys, if you notice, are going to a subgroup called bass right here. And way down here, actually, let me show just the bass tracks. And on my bass bus, I've got the CLA, I got the Crystal Knowledge bass plugin on there. I'm not afraid to admit it. I have no problems with using a plugin if it sounds good.
Right.
And it's actually carrying a lot of the weight.
Yeah.
That's without it.
getting rid of some of the nose and adding some grit.
Yeah, and just adding a little point to it,
Yeah.
making it through. With a Fairchild after that.
Yeah.
I have this on my template. I don't think I've ever changed it in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And then,
Nice.
a pull text just to add some bottom end and a little top, attenuate some of the 3K. Done.
Awesome.
The other thing I want to point out about this mix too is that again, I mixed it on that little laptop that I had, which was basically a 2-core machine, very, very, very underpowered. So if you look at my plugin use here, it's minimal.
Yeah.
I've got nothing going on.
I was noticing that when you were scrolling around.
If I opened up my template that I'm using now, or if I just showed you a preset, just for the hell of it, I'm gonna recall my track preset for my kick drum on this track here. All right, that I use now. Okay, so kick mixing. Blah, blah, blah.
You've even optimized your presets. That's great.
Yeah, I've optimized my presets.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I got like 4 things going on. I've got a Studer tape machine. I got the Slate virtual mix channel. I got a Pro Q3. I got the Sheps Omni channel ready to go. Let me undo that.
All the stuff that you like. Yeah.
So like if I try to open up my new mixes on my old machine, it would just fall apart. And that was so much fun about going back to this mix. I just opened this up yesterday for the first time in like 9 years, and like I was like, oh my god, look how little I was using,
Yeah.
You can do a lot with just a little.
Right. Yeah. Well, another thing too. I mean, you track this, so
yeah.
You probably do a little less processing on stuff that you tracked personally and produced.
Yeah, well, I track with a lot of EQ and with a lot of EQ and compression going in. My whole thing about tracking is like when the band comes in and I push up those faders, on playback, I want them to hear. I want them to be excited. I don't want to sit there. Hold on a second. Let me EQ this now, so you gotta get a playback. No, you want to cut what you want to hear.
Yeah.
The only thing I do that's and that's why I have a in the control while I'm tracking on my monitor bus, my monitor chain, I have an SSL or some VCA compressor on the stereo bus, and I'm slamming it because I want people to come in here and be excited about it.
Right.
And but one of the things I'm really proud of is I spend a lot of time with my tom miking to try to get as little bleed as possible. And if you kind of look at my tom tracks here, there's like between the tom hits and what's going on with the hi-hat and the snare hits, there's a lot of isolation there. That's always like the first sign of trouble when I mix a track from somebody else. I look at their tom track and you can't see where the tom hits are.
See the tom hits, yeah.
And then it's like that's because they compressed it too much going to tape, or a disc or whatever. So
luckily you have a key command to bring up DRM for that.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually, if you notice, I don't use gates either. The only thing I've got going on this tom track is the old the Waves Q10 equalizer, but I do all my gates using volume rides. So if I can zoom in here, I just basically, for example, if this is a tom right here, I'll just highlight the tom track, bring it up to 0, add a point there, delete a point there, and then I've got a gate,
little fade,
a gate thing going on. And this was Pro Tools 9, I believe, I did this on. So there was no clip gain back then, but today I would take that volume automation and convert it to clip gain, so that way I can just grab my faders wherever I want.
That's awesome.
I really hate gates. I don't use gates at all. I mean, I do, but I don't.
Right. Yeah, not like with the full choke. I mean, this is kind of a gate, like doing the volume automation like that, right?
Yeah, but the thing is, I kind of like to have my toms ringing out a little bit when not playing. Like here are the tom tracks. If you crank it up, you can kind of hear the toms kind of and humming away. Then when we get to the tom hit, they're about 10. That's it.
Yeah. Oh, it sounds great.
It glues to get together. Like when things are so isolated, when I get tracks and they've deleted everything around the tom hits and it's just the tom hits happening, it sucks a little bit of the life out of the drum kit to me.
Right. Right.
Especially if you just got like a 3-piece band like this, which is guitar, bass, and drums, you want to. Having super choked and isolated drum hits just sounds so sterile to me.
Right. So filling it out is nice. What's kind of funny too is as you're scrolling around, I was like, wow, the plugins that are used are a total sign of the times. too.
Yeah, oh yeah, right,
It's kind of
exactly.
interesting, right? Like this
It's
is how
like,
sessions looked. Like,
I lean really
yeah.
heavily on the SSL pack,
Mm-hmm.
from Waves, because back then these were
This is
really
what we
great
had.
because
Yeah.
I still use them occasionally. They use very little CPU power.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see what other things
Yeah.
I do. Like I use like wideners on the room tracks,
Mm-hmm.
followed by some cutting,
Yeah.
the low
Yeah.
mids, in the rooms. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if anybody out there wants me to open up more stuff, I'd be more than happy to. For
Yeah.
And I was actually also experimenting with other plugins I'd never used before. So I used like the G channel from DSP on a few things. I haven't
Mm-hmm.
used it since, I don't think.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
who uses the waves, like the EVQ anymore?
Right.
Like
Right. Yeah.
it works,
Yeah. It's funny to see this
Um,
stuff. Yeah.
let
This
me
is
see what else
cool.
am I using here. Oh yeah, the analog channel from
Mm-hmm.
DSP, just to add a little vibe to it. And that's really
Oh,
all
that's
there
great.
is. You
Yeah.
know, like, oh yeah, and here's that Moog. We're
Mm-hmm.
slowing that up. It's just I got the air chorus on it. It's
Yeah.
really bare bones.
Oh man.
There's some tracks here we didn't even use, actually, like this Korg keyboard part.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have glockenspiel on here, an acoustic guitar. I didn't want to go totally hipster and have like a cheesy Korg thing on there, so
Right. Right.
I
Right.
decided not to use it.
Yeah.
A couple real, right? We have one cheesy synth on there,
Mm-hmm.
the choruses.
You got
You
to have
know,
a cheese machine.
but you got to have the hipster,
Yeah.
glockenspiel on everything.
Mm-hmm.
Being completely slammed. Let me turn it
Yep.
down here on my side.
Oh, nice.
Slammed by the tickle the transients out using L2.
Yeah. You're
This
getting
is
good
basically Pro
sustain. Yeah.
Tools. One. Oh wow, here
Mm-hmm.
we go. The Massey de-esser on the vocal.
Nice.
God, I haven't used that in ages, and it's a great, great.
Yeah.
You lose sight,
Mm-hmm.
even
On
under
delay.
the northern lights,
Yeah.
under the midnight
I think
sun
what
will
else did I
my
use?
thoughts.
Let's see. Let's get down here.
And was
Let's see.
that vocal chain was the decaying and the distressor?
Oh yeah. It was the daking and the stressor tracking in, and then for on the output, I hardly use anything. I got
Yeah.
de-esser, I got the G channel, and then I got the Waves Max Volume, which at the time was like my favorite like squash machine. Because
Mm-hmm.
it's not as heavy. It can be just as heavy-handed as an L2, but you can also it has like this range where it kind of doesn't do anything at all. So
Yeah.
it just helped push the vocal really, really far forward.
Awesome.
And like effects wise, it's just what I got the H delay
Mm-hmm.
and the space
Mm-hmm.
and another instance of space.
Yeah.
And then I have a vocal spreader, which is basically just like 19 milliseconds. Let's see
Yeah.
where I got 15 milliseconds on one side and 7 milliseconds on the other, just
Yeah.
to widen it up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
It's awesome. And
It's really simple. I
this
mean, I think
mix
Reed
sounds
was
great,
talking
though.
yesterday
Mm-hmm.
about how, like, back in the day when you were on a console, you had like two delays, two reverbs, and that's kind of been my thing. Like, but if you open up my template now, there's like 5 reverbs, 6 delays, 2 chorus boxes and everything. It gets
Right.
it gets a bit nuts. A friend of mine's asking me a question about the lead vocal mic. It was an SM7,
Awesome.
my
Yeah.
go-to. If it's good enough for Bob Dylan, it's good enough for fucking, Not a Surf.
Right.
That's the way I look at it.
Right. Nice. Can we let's see. Can we listen to the chorus again?
Full band, sure. Here we go.
Yeah.
Go back. Here we go.
I am lost in my mind when you go to sleep. I am lost in my mind when you go to sleep.
That's great. The all of the guitars are extraordinarily articulate. Same with the bass guitar tone.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no like masking going on in the low mids. It's an amazing mix, but it all feels rock and like still beefy and thick. Do you have
This
any
was
kind
this
of
was
like
actually
tips
kind of
for
a
that
tough mix to do, because again, Matthew is more of a strummer guy, and
Mhm.
Doug's got a little articulation going on there, and just being able to get all that stuff to speak, but not step over the vocal,
Yeah.
And the guitars are kind of mid-rangey, so a lot of the top end information of this mix is really coming from the cymbals. Like if I take this track, and I mute like the overheads.
I'm lost in my mind when you go to sleep.
It's really
Lost in my mind when you.
So that's where like all the top end is coming from on the
Yeah.
track. Somebody posted a question. I'm kind of looking at over here. They're asking about
great.
the mix bus and the drum bus. All right, so getting back to my drums. All my drums. Let's see here. I do it differently now. All right, so for example, I got 2 kick drum tracks here. Those get fed into a subgroup called kick sub, so I can treat the in, out, and samples I have as one unit. And then same thing with the snare, and that's why they're above each other here. I've got a snare top and a snare bottom, and then the snare subs, the kick sub, and then their whole rest of the kit get distributed to 2 different buses, which are down here. One is called drums, which is obvious, and the other one is called drum crush, and that's just basically I've been using this for a long time too. Smack, which is another, it's kind of gritty sounding. I like it, and I'm just kind of crushing.
I'm lost in my mind when you go to sleep. I am lost in my mind when you go to sleep.
Which are my groups? So a lot of the attack, that's just with no parallel compression. And then my parallel compression is this. It's just super, super, farty and puffy and it's like that. But it's adding, it's bringing up all the room stuff,
Yeah.
Let's see what else I have going on. I do have a couple of drum samples going on. Oh, here we go. You want to talk about like low budge? Look what I'm using for look what I'm using for drum samples. I'm using Structure Free.
Yeah. Yep. There you go.
These days I use Battery. And these are actually samples I made from the band. This says Future Snare. This is actually a snare hit from another song on the record called The Future, the Last of All Things. Let me isolate that. And is it not playing because... Oh, it's going to my Snare Master. Here we go. And there's also a snare room sound too. Where is it? I can't find it. Oh, right here. Get that. Nope. Yeah. So I'm supplementing the snare drum with that. Bus, dude, how simple can this be?
Yeah, that's great.
It's just that. If you can see down here, it's bypass Ozone 4, which I can't run in this version of Pro Tools, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I kind of played it by ear, and I duplicated it with Ozone 9, and I use their imaging program a little bit to spread out the low mids, which is weird. I like it. I take everything between like 200 and 700, and I just kind of widen it a bit. And it takes out kind of the mud in the middle of the track and kind of gives the vocal a little bit of space. And then I've just got a little. Lost in my mind when you go to sleep. And just a little bit of limiting on the bus. It doesn't go, it probably hits, let's see. It goes down to a couple spots, but it just caps it off, because if you look at my
SSL's not working too hard either.
Oh no, not at all. The SSL is
I'm lost in my mind when you go.
And I don't like to limit my mixes too hard. Instead of getting a big black box, pair of black lines, in your stereo file like here. I prefer my mixes to kind of look like, I like them to look like logs wrapped in barbed wire.
Nice.
That's how I do it. If I see like just big black blocks, I get worried.
Right.
Not to say I've never done that before, but I do, but that's that's kind of what I shoot for.
Yeah. That's great. I noticed. So you have your mixed meter bus, and I saw in your picture you had a clarity meter. Um, do you, when you're starting out a mix, do you have gain staging that you're shooting at? You know, when you start like pulling faders up, you're like, I like
These days
this at
I
this
do.
level.
When I was making this, I probably didn't.
Yeah.
I try to I try to make sure like how a Pro Tools meter goes from green to yellow to orange to red, right?
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like my before it hits any of my plugins. I kind of like it hitting right about here, all my levels. That's what I do these days. So I'll take clip gain and gain everything, so they're all kind of hitting around the same volume. But once I get to that, gain staging means absolutely nothing to me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, but that's a big step on the beginning of it, right?
Because I see this online all the time, people saying that gain staging doesn't matter with plugins, but it does, like especially if you're using a modeled plugin like the SSL. If you hit that too hard, it's going to distort, it's going to crap out. But something like not this, but something like for example, the Fab Filter Pro Q3, which is these days my go-to EQ, you can slam ridiculous amounts of level in there because it's a pure 64-bit digital EQ, and it's not going to distort until you output it to an output bus too hard.
Right.
So gain staging, I keep an eye on it, but it doesn't really. It's not. I don't like. I'm not militant about it. Because if I'm hitting my master, if I'm summing everything and everything hits my master bus is just slamming, I'll just make a master bus fader and just drop it down.
Right.
Because again, with internally, before you hit the output of your converter, you got 64 bits and so much headroom in there that you can literally just put a fader at the very end of the chain and then just pull it down and you get it all back.
Right. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, we have a ton of questions here, and I'm sure you have mixing and all kinds of stuff to do, so I'll try to keep it moving here. So the one question about acoustic stuff. We had a really fun live stream last Thursday with Martin Pilchner, and somebody I remember in that one asked about vaulted ceilings. So 2 questions on acoustics. What material did you do your DIY stuff with? And then
it's half and half. The ones in the back, newer ones, are basically 2 layers of Owens Corning 403. Is that what it is? Or 703? I can't remember. I think it's 703. It's just 2 layers of that wrapped around a wooden frame, and then I covered the back of the frame with a piece of cloth, and I wrapped the whole thing in cloth. And they're suspended off the ceilings. I can kind of raise this up a little bit so you can kind of see. There's little standoffs on the side, and they're holding it about 4 inches off the back. All right. So basically, sound hits the absorber. Anything that's left when it comes out the back reflects again off the back and then back through again. So the more space you have between the wall and the insulation, the more effective the absorbers are. Now the ones that are like, I don't know if you know about first reflections. Basically, first reflections are the ones you really want to be like getting a handle on. And the easiest way to find the first reflection is have someone hold a mirror against the wall on the side and drag it between your speaker and you. And where you see the speaker in the mirror, that's your first reflection point. So those are the primary ones. And all the ones that aren't on the first reflection point, between the fiberglass and the muslin, I have a very thin piece of plastic. It's basically just a painter's drop cloth, like a thin 1 mil, so it reflects a little bit of the high end back, not like lots of it reflects mid-range back, so it doesn't feel so completely dead. So if you stand in front of the first reflection baffle and you talk into it, you hear nothing coming back at you, but then you go to the one next to it, you talk into it, you can kind of hear your voice coming back at you because there's a very thin layer of plastic in there. And I actually learned that from Jonathan Weiner, of all places, the Gear Sluts forum, which I would never recommend anyone going to Gear Sluts. Sorry.
It's not good for your soul.
The acoustic forum is actually quite good. I got a lot done there. In fact, if you search my name on Gear Sluts, you'll find I actually posted a thread of how I built all of these, and
Awesome.
how they were constructed.
Oh, cool.
They work great,
Yeah.
and they're on pieces of wood with little hooks on them. I can actually slide them around a little bit if I have to. But
Yeah.
I did that just so I can adjust them. But once I got them in place, they just stay there.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. So, last question. I think your last place had vaulted ceilings as well, right?
No, my last place was just a square room.
It was a square room. Okay.
A 12,
Cool.
a 10 by 14 room.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody in that last chat had asked about like dealing with a vaulted ceiling and
Well, don't think
you've
I had to
done
do
that.
with this. This ceiling is a little weird in that it kind of comes up and then it's flat at the top,
Mm-hmm.
and so I had to put more on the back, and it was weird. I have there's something like 32 or 40 baffles in this room,
Mm-hmm.
and like I kept putting them up, and I kept on having to build more because I kept getting reflections. It wasn't until I put the very last one in the way back, and all of a sudden,
Yeah.
bang, the room came together because
Wow.
all the sound was going down there and just fluttering.
Right.
So
Right.
it just
And then it
takes
felt
lots of
right.
absorption.
Yeah.
Based.
Awesome.
And it's the room is really flat where I'm sitting, and maybe about another 10 feet back. If you're standing anywhere else, it's booming as all hell. But I've measured it, and it's really flat. I actually do use a little bit of room EQ on my speakers. I use the SonarWorks 4 on
Awesome.
mine,
Yeah.
and it like on my I have my on my Genelex here. It's not doing a hell of a lot. It's maybe 4 dB in the mid range.
Right.
The frequency response, starting out was actually quite good. My other room in Brooklyn had a real nasty dip over here, and a real weird peak over here. But in this room, I got a really flat response.
That's great. Yeah, normally that like 100 hertz area is really really rough.
It's getting stuff in the corners is really important too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome. Okay, well, yesterday Vance told us to ask you about why Bob Dylan changes studios.
Why Bob Dylan changes studios?
Yeah, he said ask Chris Shaw why Bob
I
Dylan
don't
changes studios.
Vance. I have no fucking clue what you're talking about. He depends upon who he's working with.
Mm-hmm.
Like he works at whatever the producer wants to work at, but he likes certain vibes. Like he won't work at Power Station Avatar anymore because he made a record there. I don't want to mention names, but he really hated working with this guy there, so he won't go back there because it's got like a little bit of mojo.
Right.
I actually almost got him to work at Blackbird in Nashville, but I was describing the studio to him, and he's like, "Well, why is it called Blackbird?" I'm like, "Well, the owner is a real big Beatles fan." He's like, "I don't want to work
there." That's funny.
But working with Bob is a treat to work with because nobody makes records like the way Bob makes a record. He walks into the studio, he doesn't have he has a song, he has lyrics, he has a rough melody, and maybe a basic chord progression, but the arrangement is totally up in the air until he gets into the room with the band. So that's why there's so many alternate versions of Bob Dylan songs, because he'll do something like a blues, and he'll listen back and be like, nah, it doesn't work with the song. And then he'll do it as like a Western shuffle, or then he'll do it like a New Orleans thing. And then his instrument of choice is actually the band. He tells the band how to play things. So that's why there's multiple bootleg boxes and alternate versions of everything he does, because you can see the progression of how, like for example, like a Rolling Stone, when he first cut it, it was a waltz. It was once upon a time, it's just so fine to do the bones. How does it feel da 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 to be on your own? But now it's in 4/4 because somebody just said, "Hey man, it just sounds like you're trying to cram too many things in." He goes, "All right, well let's do it in 4/4." And then
we'll just throw in another beat. Yeah.
Boom, done.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
That's what I love about working with him, because it's a lot of work, because he'll change the style of the track at the drop of a hat, and then you got to run out there and move microphones and get new sounds, and you got like 20 minutes maybe to get stuff done. And then once he doesn't even tell you okay, record. You just kind of know when you're supposed to be recording. And one time I forgot to hit record, because he said, "Oh, let's just rehearse that intro," and they started rehearsing the intro. Then they started playing the verse and the first chorus, and he started singing. I was like, "Oh, God damn it!
This is
I didn't record."
Yeah. Right.
And
Yeah, I
it
was
was
just gonna
exciting.
ask, like, I mean, changing a style that quickly or whatever, you're gonna change your tones and all that, so it must be really
Mhm.
challenging to have to move
Well,
that
like
quick.
you basically have to be ready for everything. Like the last record I made with him, we were at Clinton. I must have had like 45 microphones out there in the
Wow.
room,
Yeah.
and like a whole bunch of patch cables just sort of hanging out, on the patch bay, ready to go, to
Yeah.
switch mics and stuff,
Right.
because he's impatient. He doesn't like to wait, which is
Right.
understandable.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you're exhausted, and it can be frustrating sometimes. But when you're done, the song is done at the end of the day. It's like
Right.
it's in the
Right.
can and ready to go.
Yeah.
I
That's
mean, the
cool.
first thing I did with him,
Yeah.
I did it took longer to set up than record a song, and then next thing you know, he's winning an Oscar, for a
Right.
rough mix I did. You know,
That's
it's
awesome.
all in the moment, and
Yeah.
that's something that a lot of people should strive for,
Hmm.
especially playing live is the most important thing. I got 4 Grammys back there, and all 4 of them are from bands playing live in the room, amps and all,
Yeah.
and just doing it with minimal overdubs. And I'm sure everybody
Yeah.
else you talk to will say the same thing. If you get it on the floor, it's better than like trying to make it happen afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a better experience for everybody too, because you're not
Oh,
chasing after something that
absolutely.
doesn't
You just
exist.
feel like
Yeah.
you've got something done. When everybody comes in, you hit play, and like you got the vocal and
Yeah.
everything there. It's just like, you say, yeah, we got it, or no, we don't got it. Let's try it again. It's
Yeah.
it's the way to go.
Right.
But
That's
it's
awesome.
also depending upon what kind of music you're making.
Hmm. Right. Okay. So, let's see. Did you find it challenging as a producer and engineer to switch genre gears so drastically as you have working with both classic folk, rock, and big names in hip hop? How do you creatively transition between such different musical styles and sensibilities?
I don't look at it as transitioning.
Hmm.
To me, it's kind of all the same. I think the most important part is you have to be excited about working on whatever it is that you're working about. You know, um, I've I've turned down I've turned down things like I've gotten demos for bands and stuff like that, and listened to the demos, and not being able to even be like jazzed about one of the songs. Like I've done records where you know, yeah, the record's good, but the reason why I did it is because of these 4 songs. I love these 4 songs. These are great.
Yeah.
I think if you're not excited about working on something, you really shouldn't be in the room.
Mm.
And I've actually turned down big records because I was like, I don't feel it.
Right.
I took a meeting like in the mid '90s with this A&R guy from Geffen, and he's like, we got this band, they're doing their second record, and they love the Weezer record, they would love you to work with them. Here's their first record, check it out. I was like, okay, great. That went home. I listened to the record, and it was like this Southern California ska band. I like ska, but I love like English ska, like two-tone ska, and like the specials, the English beat and stuff like that. I really don't like American ska, and this
Mm.
was like the Southern California ska band, and I
Mm.
said no. And it turns out I said no to Tragic Kingdom, for by No Doubt,
Wow.
because
Yeah.
No
Wow.
Doubt's first record was a ska record, it was like a
Yeah.
Southern California ska record.
Yeah.
And then, a couple of years later, I got asked to do a Mighty Mighty Boss Tones record. Same thing. I'm like, I just don't like ska. And that was the one record with the one big hit that they had on
Oh
it.
man. Right.
So,
Right.
I know a guy who said no to Hootie and the Blowfish on their first record because he didn't like the record. He didn't
Yeah.
like the songs.
Right. Right.
He's like, my wife killed me afterwards, but it happens.
Well, in a roundabout way, I mean, you
So,
could.
so as far as like switching genres, it's just about being like into it and dive in, because you're basically, as a engineer, the very minimal thing you're doing is being a photographer, and just capturing the sounds that are out there.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's all the same. It's all the same thing, kind of, when you're mixing hip hop or mixing rock or any other popular genre. It's all about attitude,
Hmm.
and what it is that you bring to it. I used to
Right.
joke back in my Public Enemy days, like, if you gave me and Bob Clearmountain the same Bruce Springsteen track to mix, okay, Bob Clearmountain's record would sound 10 times better than my mix. But if you, at the same time, when I was making Public Enemy records, if you gave Bob Clearmountain a Public Enemy track and gave me the same track, I'd be damn straight that my mix is going to sound better. Because
Yeah.
what does Bob know about hip hop? I'm not saying he couldn't do it technically, but his mix maybe wouldn't have the attitude that a hip hop track would need.
Right.
I'm sure it
Right.
would sound pristine and beautiful and great and wonderful because Bob's mixes are incredible. He's like the nicest guy. I'm sure he
Hmm.
would do a good job, but it wouldn't have that thing.
Right.
And part of it is
Right.
you have to identify where the attitude's coming from.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, like, in a roundabout way, those records may have had the success that they did and connected with people the way that they did because you said no to the record. You know, you did contribute to that record in a
Yeah.
way because you
Hmm.
gave it to somebody who wanted to be there doing it,
And
right?
I've done that. I've
Mm-hmm.
said no to people. I've said, like there was a um I got asked to do a remix for a single for that band Manic Street Preachers back in the day,
Mm-hmm.
and it was from the guy, the head of A&R at Columbia. It was like the first thing I was going to do for him. So I was like, oh god, yeah, I'm gonna get a chance to work with this guy. And
Yeah.
he's like, can you do a remix of this track? And I took it home and I listened to it like over and over again, and I went, I don't hear anything that I'm going to bring to the table here. I just
Mm.
don't. Like
Yeah.
I think this mix is great. I don't know what I would do would make the song any better as far as the attitude and the vibe and everything. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, it'll sound different, but I don't think I'm going to contribute anything to this that's going to make it, even better. And this is back when my career was just starting. I mean, I hadn't even done any of my big records yet. And I
Yeah.
called him back. I went to call the A&R guy back. I said, hey, I really want to do something with you. I really want to do something with you, but I don't think this is the one thing that you want
Yeah.
me to do because I don't feel it. I mean, the song is great. I love it the way it is. I don't know what to do with it. And I got so much more work from that guy after that
Yeah.
because I was honest with him about it. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
like I
There's a
I
big
do turn
lesson
I
there.
do turn things down, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I've turned things down and changed my mind later. Like I remember I did a record. I got some demos from a band, and they were really murky and dark and really not very good. I couldn't really
Mm-hmm.
hear the songs, and I told my manager, I was like, "Nah, I don't think I'm going to do this. I don't like the
Mm-hmm.
demos." He said, "Well, they're playing live tonight, in town. Why don't you go check them out?" And then when I went to the show, I went, "Oh, Jesus Christ, I got to do these guys." Like
Mm.
the recordings don't do them any justice. So there are a lot of
Right.
things to consider. I mean, genre humping, out humping, genre hopping, for
Mm-hmm.
me isn't really difficult. It's just you have to be honest with yourself and say whether or not you can bring something to the project.
Right. Right. Yeah.
That's really what it's
Really good
about.
lesson in there. And there's the whole thing too, like anytime that you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else and all
Yeah, I
that,
mean, if you're lucky.
Right. Yeah. Let's see. So, hi Chris, what is one of the most important things you learned while working with legendary people like Bob Dylan?
Most important thing. Well, a couple of things.
Mm-hmm.
I find that this is a side note. Like I find that the people in the music business who deserve to be assholes.
Mm.
Okay, like people are really important. Like guys like Bob Dylan, or like I've worked with Keith Richards a bunch of times, and all these other people I've worked with. All these people who really deserve to be absolute jerks
Mm-hmm.
generally aren't, and vice versa. Like people who are just starting out and making
Amazing.
their first record can be just such absolute assholes. And it's like, dude,
Right.
where are you coming from?
Yeah.
But like, actually, the most important lesson I've learned from working with these people is you really have to put your own ego aside and realize, and this applies to anybody you work with, that the record you're making isn't your record unless you're the
Mm-hmm.
producer, obviously. But even as a producer, still, it's not your record. So our jobs is really to pull out the essence of the artist, whatever it may be, whether they're great singers or great songwriters or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of stay out of the way and deliver what they want. I've worked, before I worked with Bob, like I heard all these wild stories about how famously difficult he was to work with,
Mm.
that he was like really ornery and like, crabby and like, all this other stuff. And I found it to be the exact opposite. And I think it was because like on the first day I worked with him, he played the song, he picked up a guitar and played the song and like, how it went. So everybody could hear it. And then after talking to the band about how he wanted the arrangement to go, I walked out into the live room and I looked at him. I said, Bob, how do you hear this sonically? What are you hearing? Like, what kind of vibe are you going for? And he kind of looked at me and said, well, I want to sound like an old Billie Holiday record. I'm like, great.
Mm.
And I went into control and I did my damnedest to make it sound like an old Billie Holiday record. And I just
Yeah.
delivered what he wanted. I find that when somebody, like when a fellow engineer, a friend of mine, or a producer, a friend of mine says, yeah, that guy was really difficult to work with. In the back of my mind, I'm always asking, is it because they didn't do what you wanted them to do? Or was it because you were trying to insert yourself into this process heavily? Or were they truly really difficult to work with?
Right. Right. Right.
And it's humbling,
Mm.
like Bob, like everyone, chomps at the bit to work with a big artist. I'm no exception.
Mm-hmm.
But growing up, I wasn't a huge Bob Dylan fan. I had like maybe one or two of his records. I wasn't like rabid. He wasn't like this thing that I listened to all the time.
Right.
And then I got the call to work with Bob, and I was a little nervous, but I was nervous for different reasons, because I looked back at all the other producers and engineers he had worked with, and I realized that, like, God, he's worked with these legends, and now all of a sudden, this guy named Chris Shaw is going to get tacked onto the bottom of this list of people who work with Bob Dylan. I can't make a bad sounding Bob Dylan record, and the weight of the world was just sort of like, I got to bring my AAA game here,
Right.
And then that first day in the studio with him, I got sounds in the band. Bob came in, I got him behind the mic. I was like, "Hey, Bob, can you check your mic?" And I'm leaning over the console, my hand on the mic pre, and he started to sing. And all of a sudden, like, I was like, "Holy shit, that's fucking Bob Dylan!" And like
Man.
the gallon of sweat just instantly secreted out of my body, And I was like, "Oh my God!" Like, don't be careful what you wish for, But I just sort of calmed down, and then the way I got through it, I was just thought, okay, this is a guy named Bob. He's got the song he wants to record. I got to deliver the goods, And you got to just try to push that noise out and just be one-on-one with this guy, whoever you're working with, because it's a team effort, like unless they treat you like absolute crap, it's your job as an engineer or producers to be a partner in this battle you're about to wage, making a record, and I think once I established with Bob that I was there to work as an instrument for him to get what he hears in his head out of those speakers, we hit it off like, bread and butter, it was great.
That's awesome.
And I've never had I mean, he has his ways. He's a little, eccentric to say the least, but he's not difficult at all. Not at all. At least for me, with me.
Yeah. That's awesome. It's always fun to hear those stories. What do you think? One more?
Sure, yeah, as long as you guys want to go until my voice goes out, I'm fine.
Okay, cool. Let's see here. So let's do. Actually, I like this one. So hi, Chris. I love your work with Weezer and Bob Dylan, but I think "Rings Around the World" by Super Furry Animals is a superb musical achievement. How did you find a way to mix so many dense tracks without making a muddy mess?
That was something
hard. I noticed in this.
Those mixes were hard. I wish I had the multi-tracks for that, because they're pretty expensive. Yeah. That record took close to a year to make. We not nonstop. We like work for a couple months, take a month off, work for a couple months, take a month off, and then we actually mixed it twice. We mixed it in stereo, and then we came back about a month later and remixed the entire record in surround. It was actually one of the first studio records that was released simultaneously in surround and stereo. And each surround mix also had a video accompanying with it as well. So it was a big DVD. If you could get your hands on a DVD and and play it through a really good surround system, you're gonna love it, because we just went absolutely ape shit with panning and stuff like that. But my job as a producer with those guys was to tell them to stop. Because I'd be like, guys, we can't fit one more idea into this song. we're at peak ideas here, and they were working with them is loads of fun, because there's never a shortage of ideas with them whatsoever. And it was a combination of analog and Pro Tools, because I'd mixed a record with them before that one, an album called Gorilla, and I brought my Pro Tools rig over with me. It was the first time they'd ever worked with Pro Tools, so I was like putting vocals in there and tuning them, and chopping things up, and like the keyboard player and the bass player were looking over my shoulder the entire time, just like fascinated, like, what can you do with this? I'm like, well, there's like pretty much nothing you can't do with Pro Tools, and this is back in Pro Tools version like 4, something like that. And then we hit it off really well, so they asked me to do the second record, and like we were about halfway through tracking that when the label gave us the approval to do 5/1 mixes, and then all of a sudden everything became multiples of 5. Like there's like a song with 5 drum kits on it, and there's 5 keyboards, and there's 5 guitars, and getting it to work was really tough. And they're extremely democratic band as well. Everyone has equal say in everything. So the drummer could tell the guitar player like that the solo sucks, or whatever. And that made for very long days and long mixes. When we mixed it at Metropolis in London, each mix took at least 2, maybe sometimes 3 days, because it was just they were very dense, And we knew we were going to be mixing surround at a later date, and rather than try to recreate the real, and because we were actually going to be mixing in a different studio, I had my Pro Tools rig. I had a guy working with me who had his own Pro Tools rig. My buddy
Mm-hmm.
Eric came over with us to London to do it. At the end of each mix, we took a direct out of every channel on the console and recorded it into Pro Tools, basically making individual stems for everything,
Yeah. Yeah.
post fader as well. So all the
Right.
volume rides were baked in. So when we went to do the surround mix, I just basically took all those tracks, brought them up on the SSL, and just repanned things for surround and
Brilliant.
everything, and
Yeah.
we would get like 95% of the mix back, and I just have to spend like half a day, maybe different effects or compressing things slightly differently or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there was a lot of fun. We did it at a place called Mono Valley, which is Andrew Shep's place. This
Yes.
is before there was a Neve in there. It
Right.
was pretty run down at that point. It had like a Trident TSM, half the
Mhm.
gear didn't work, but it's a residential studio. So they
Mhm.
basically gave us the keys and said, we'll see you in 2 months. And
Oh
so
man.
you can
Cool.
imagine how chaotic things got, So
Yeah.
with those guys, we'd be getting up around noon. We'd be in the studio by 1. I had to make sure I got everything I needed them out of that day by like 9:30, because then the beer would come out, and then
It'd be over.
various assorted chemicals and
Right.
things. So yeah, there
Yeah.
were some pretty wild things that happened.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of fun. We did something like 20 songs for that record. Like I think 12 made to the album, and then there was a release with an extra 8 on it.
Nice.
So it was probably one of the most expensive and expansive records I've ever worked on.
Wow.
Ever. We had
Wow.
strings on it. We had Paul McCartney on it at one point, chewing vegetables. We sent him a DAT, and then he sent the DAT back. It's just him chewing vegetables in time with a song. We had John Cale on it.
Gosh.
Had the High Llamas on there, like the guitar player. A couple of guys from the Manic Street Preachers were on there. It was a lot. I played on it. It was loads of fun. It was probably one of the most adventurous records I ever did.
That is cool. Nice.
I highly recommend you guys finding it and listening to it, because it's loads of fun.
Yeah. Wow. So these days, are you spending more time mixing or producing or both, or?
I would say that 90% of what I do is mixing now
Mm-hmm.
from home. So
Yeah.
when it's funny because everyone's in quarantine, because of the coronavirus. So I'm just like, no difference to me. I'm
Right.
here all the time anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's like, I think the secret to keeping sane when working from home, if we've got people here who are working from home for the first time, is to keep a schedule. It's really the most important thing. Like I always make sure I'm usually up by 8 o'clock in the morning, because my dogs get up at that time, and then I eat breakfast, I watch the news, I check my social media, whatever, my emails. I try to be in this spot by like 10:30, 11 o'clock, and then around 1 o'clock I'll walk my dogs, come back, work for a little bit, have lunch around 3:30, and I'm usually trying to wrap up by 6 or 7 o'clock.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just trying to keep a schedule, like set goals, like I want to make sure I have this mix done by this date, or I want to have this set up by that date, because if you don't, the days just seem to run into each other, and
Right.
it's like there's like it's weird.
Right. Right.
It's really important to keep a schedule.
That's a great tip. Yeah. Let's see. So, let's see. Hi, Chris. I'm a big fan of your work with SFA and Ween. SFA. Sorry, I don't know.
I got my Ween koozie right here.
Oh, nice. Amazing. I'm not sure who SFA is. I'm assuming short for
Super
something.
Furry Animals.
Oh, right. Duh. Okay. And can you give us some thoughts about your approach to mixing drums and vocals?
Personal thoughts about mixing drum and vocals. That's a pretty generic question.
Do you have an approach? Well, maybe just let's focus on vocals, because we kind of hit.
Well, yeah, I could talk about drums too. Like, because I grew up listening to rock and prog rock and punk rock as a kid, and electronic music and everything. And then I wind up doing lots of hip hop, and my drum sounds and the way I approach drums really kind of stem from my hip hop days. You want the kick drum really loud, you want the snare drum really loud, which is why this song we were just looking at was kind of weird for me, because I actually kind of subdued the drums a bit, so they're not really banging except the snare, because I just thought it was more appropriate for the song. But I appropriate for the song is really the key set of words here. It's because you can get like a banging drum sound, but if it doesn't fit the attitude of the song, you're not. It could be the worst drum sound.
Yeah.
I think. So that really is where I'm at, and you kind of have to visualize ahead of time. Sometimes I'll even like listen to my rough mix or listen to the rough mix of the song, and before I actually sit down and dig into the mix, I'll handwrite some notes of the things I want to accomplish in the mix, like because
Mm.
I'm a big fan of like first impressions, and the ideas that pop into your head first are usually the correct ones. So I always write them down just to make sure I don't forget them.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes I'll just write, like subdued drums or washy drums or banging drums. And like one key element to me is sort of like the snare and vocal balance. Do we want the vocal behind the
Mm.
snare, or do you want the vocal over the snare?
Yeah.
And how does it's all about that mid range area, like where do you who's going to be out up front, who's going to be on, like volume wise and also panning wise, where do you want things, because do you want the singer to be fighting with the guitars and the snare, or do you want the singer just dominating the track,
Right.
you know
Yeah.
and you really
That
need
was a
to,
big one that you just hit, was that depth thing about
yeah,
snare
and
vocal.
depth. So
Yeah.
for me, like with vocals, like on this track, I mean, my vocal processing can be either ridiculously complex or super simple. One thing that's a constant for me is, that spreading effect, that everybody
Mm-hmm.
uses. Everybody gets it a different way, but like in this track, I just had like two really short, super short delays, like 7.5 milliseconds on one side, 15 milliseconds on the other, and basically I just
Mm-hmm.
feed the vocal into it until I can actually hear it, and then back it off. So
Yeah.
you kind of, so you and then back it off, and then when you mute it, when you get rid of it, you hear the vocal just kind of do this,
Yeah.
then when you turn it back on, you hear it kind of widen, but you can't tell why it's widening. And that to me is like one of my favorite tricks. And there's always like a little bit of a short slap to add a little depth. And
Mm.
then it's just sort of a matter of like, where do you want the bigness to come from? Do you want it coming from a reverb, or do you want the sound big but not occupy a lot of space? If that's what you want, then maybe like delays that are kind of quiet and dark,
Mm.
making the vocal bigger. And
Mm.
I think cinematically, to me, it's mixing is almost visual for me,
Yeah.
and like, for me, I spend most of my time in the mix dealing with mid range, like between like 1K and 5K. That's
Mm.
where all my time goes,
Yeah.
like like which and also establishing, like what I call, I guess you can call like highlights during the song, or I call it stepping stones. Like
Mm-hmm.
you want to kind of guide the listener and make them pay attention to certain things in the mix that you want them to pay attention to, like stepping stones in a river. Like you want to cross this river from one side to the other, you want the stepping stones to be obvious. It's like you put your foot here and you put your foot there and you put your foot there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how
I'm lost in my mind when you
sorry about that.
Oh, there.
That's kind of how I visualize the mixes, like the progression of a mix. Like, what do you want the listener to notice?
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like if someone's describing that song to somebody else using only their voice, what is it that you want them to sing?
Mm.
Like, Smells Like Teen Spirit to me is dun 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 dun
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
boom ding do 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 do
Mm-hmm.
boom ding. So like that's how you would sing the song, and like you don't want them singing the hi-hat part, you don't want them singing like the kick drum pattern, like, or maybe you do. Like, what
Right.
is it that you want the person to take away from each moment of the song, and make sure that that part is like obvious and expressed.
Awesome. Yeah. Oh,
That's
great
how.
tip.
That's
That's
basically my
great.
approach to mixing from top to bottom. And
Yeah. Yeah.
how you get there, it varies. Sometimes I start with the drums and build up the track, and then the vocal comes in last. But for the last few years, the way I do it is I kind of get the rhythm track happening, like the drums, the bass, the main harmonic instrument, whether it be a keyboard or a rhythm guitar, and then I
Mm-hmm.
get the vocal in as quickly as possible. I just push that vocal up, get a delay, a reverb, or whatever, and then from that point on, I just sort of mix everything around the vocal.
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
always find if you mix the instrumental first and you put the vocal in, you're like, oh man, I can't get the vocal to
Where do
sit.
I put it?
That's
Yeah.
because you have been listening to it.
Right.
You
Awesome.
shouldn't be able. You should mute the. You should be able to mute the vocal and have the song fall apart almost. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. Right.
Because if you got a
That's
great
great.
instrumental track, then where the hell are you gonna put the vocal in?
Yeah.
You
Um. So, and specifically, that's usually because you just haven't made space, right? Like you
Yeah,
haven't.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Let's see. So I have almost gotten through all the ones that were sent to me. Um, oh, here we go. This is good. What is the most common or obvious mistake or mistakes you see or hear in a brand new producer or mixer's tracks?
Way too much processing is probably my number one
Yeah.
complaint. Like I get vocals that have just like going have either and I can't really tell if they've been cut that way or when people are sending me like exports from Logic or something like that that they're leaving in their compressor, but you get these vocals that are just super compressed and there's like
Mm.
nothing you can do to make them like sound more dynamic, you know. I mean, granted, I will use a fuck ton of compression on the vocal in a mix, but
Right.
I mean, it's I automate it in and out in certain sections. You know, I do all kinds of stuff to make like for me like extreme compression is more about the. I mean, it's about the dynamics, but I use it mostly for the tone. I want to try to get the tone, like of the
Yeah.
note out of the singer out of there. So when you really step on a vocal with a compressor, the first thing that happens that's annoying is like is the de-essing. Get all these S's and spits and everything. It just sounds and it's really harsh. And I'll go in there with clip gain and Pro Tools, and I will
Mm.
take out all the S's and all the T's so that with extreme compression, it's making the vocal sound like more in your face and have more tone than it
Yeah.
is accentuating all this other stuff. But when I get something like that from a new producer or a new engineer, and it's just been completely stepped on. I'll call them up and ask them, man, hey, look, did you export this with the compressor on, or is that the way
Mm.
you recorded it? Because I'd rather have just the raw vocal,
Yeah.
if possible. And yeah, just too much processing is usually the deal, you know, especially if you know you're not going to be mixing a track,
Mm-hmm.
um, like don't process it on the way into the computer, you know, too much. I mean, yeah, I mean, you're going to want to put a little compression on the vocal, but don't like nail it, with
Right.
like minus 5 dB of compression and leave it there, like my whole thing is like when I'm EQing to tape or to the computer and I'm tracking an instrument, I will dial in the compression in the compute in the EQ to where I think, wow, that sounds great. And then I back it off just a
Mm-hmm.
little bit because when you're getting a sound with a guitar player and he's not playing to the track, he's playing at one dynamic, and then you
Yeah.
hit the track, and then all of a sudden he's like into it, and he's slamming it, and all your settings go out the window. So I always just sort of dial it into taste and just back it off a little bit because you can always add
Mm.
more EQ, you can always add a little more compression later on, but you can't really take it away. I mean, there are plugins that help you do that, but I don't want to be doing that. You know.
Right. Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and the other thing is just like getting your tracks organized.
Mm-hmm.
Don't send like I get Pro Tool sessions and everything is in it, like all the alternate tracks, all the alternate takes, everything. Strip everything out that you don't want to be used.
Yeah.
Make sure I get a really decent sounding rough mix. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be slam it. Just give me a rough mix that kind of expresses how you want the relative balance of everything.
Right. Right.
Um, but yeah, that's pretty much the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Like when basically my whole thing is like when you record something, solo that track that you just recorded or solo that overdub and listen to it. Does it
Mm-hmm.
sound like it's a good recording? And if it
Right.
doesn't, twist some more knobs and do it again.
Right. Right. That's huge. Okay. Another one. If you're mixing from home, are you mainly mixing on headphones? Um, so we kind of talked about that a little bit earlier, but do you have any mixing on headphone tips or anything?
I rarely do it. I mean, I don't mix on headphones. This is like here's
Mm-hmm.
my
Yeah.
that's my studio. I got a pair of Genelecs that are about 6 feet away from me, which is
Mm-hmm.
a lot farther than what they're designed, but they sound great there.
Mm.
Got a pair of near fields. Occasionally, I will, pop up on headphones. Occasionally, just to double check, make sure nothing wacky is going on. But
Mm-hmm.
I rarely do. I mean,
Yeah.
because my room is very tight sounding, and my speakers are pretty far apart, and they're aimed right here to my ears, and they pretty much sound like headphones anyway. So,
Yeah.
like I know like 90% of everybody who listens to music these days is on earbuds, and I'll double
Mm-hmm.
check to make sure there's nothing crazy going on. But I don't mix on headphones. I don't know how Andrew does it. Andrew Sheps, I
Yeah.
know that's his
Yeah.
thing, but and more power to him. I got to sit down and talk to him about it. But
Yeah.
uh,
Well, we
I
have a
can't.
video coming out about it pretty
Yeah,
soon with Andrew. Yeah.
yeah,
Talking about it, which is
I'm
cool.
dying to meet Andrew because he and
Yeah.
I've listened to his podcasts and I listened to his interviews, and he and I think along very very similar
Mm.
thought processes. Plus,
Awesome.
I want to hopefully maybe get a chance to go back out to Mono Valley really quick before he pulls all his gear out of it.
Right. Right. Yeah. He's really really fun. Um, let's see. I think one more question's coming in. Did you see anything in there that you want to address?
Um, keep checking the track in stereo. Boom, boom, boom. acoustic guitar processing approach. I don't know too much about processing acoustic guitars, like as far as because most of the acoustic guitars I mix, I record. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that's it's a tricky beast. Acoustic guitar is one of the hard to me is like one of the hardest things to do because a lot of times I get it and it's not recorded very properly. So I'm using I will usually pile out like tons of EQ. I find that with almost every pretty much anything that's been recorded with a mic and not done right, there's usually a resonant frequency somewhere that needs to be tamed. Like especially in overheads, I always find there's like a frequency like around 3.8K. Like it's either because it's a bad symbol, or it's hitting the resonant frequency of the diaphragm of the overhead or something like that, and it just will whistle. And when you find it and you notch it out, it's obvious, when it happens. Or I do a lot of, alternative folk stuff, and I'll mix a lot of mandolins, and mandolins have like a very boxy tone to them. And you'll find it's like around 500. And when you notch that out, all of a sudden you can crank that mandolin track really loud in the mix, and it doesn't like swallow everything up,
Yeah.
It all depends upon what your acoustic guitar is doing, like what its function is. Like I'll do acoustic guitar overdubs a lot in my productions because I use it as a replacement for the tambourine. I really am not a big fan of like tambourines that just go.
Yeah.
I just have to hit, on a 2 and 4, and do the 16th note or 8th note on a shaker or something like that. I also will, rather than using a tambourine at all, I'll just have the guitar player do an acoustic guitar track, and I call it acoustic guitar as tambourine, and I'll like just lop off all the low mids down and have just the top end, so all you're really hearing is the pick and like the shimmering of it, and I'll pan that off to the side, and it does the exact same thing as a tambourine, except it's a guitar.
Right.
It's always trying to find where the resonant frequencies in the acoustic guitar that work and don't work, and don't be afraid to be very extreme with the EQ, if you have,
Right.
And basically, when it comes to any sort of sound and any sort of recording, it all comes down to the player and the instrument. If you put a really good player, like people ask me all the time about drum sounds, it's like if you put a really good player behind a shitty drum kit, it's still going to be a great drum track, because the guy, it's all about the performance. But if you get a really good player on a really good kit in a really good room, getting drum sounds is a piece of cake. I can record like Josh Freese at the power station and get drum sounds in like 10 minutes. It's really that simple. I've got, you notch out the low mids on the kick drum, a little top end, a little click, a little thud, a little top end on the snare, roll off, the bottom end on your overheads and your hi-hats, and, do what you got to do on the toms and get your room mics going. You're done. It's as simple as that. I did it. I just finished working with Matt Chamberlain on something, and Matt like is a monster drummer, and like we did the first take of a song, and then he came in and he listened to it and he went, "Oh, it doesn't sound right." I'm like, "Well, what do you want me to change?" He goes, "No, I'm not playing it right." And he went back out there and just changed his dynamics, and bang, there it was.
Wow.
And really well tuned drums. Like if you like a drum kit is not tuned properly, there's nothing you're going to do besides replacing everything with samples. It's like to make it sound good,
Yeah. Do you have any tips on tuning?
I actually am not very good at tuning drums. I kind of know how to do it in my own weird way, but I found that if you've got a tom-tom track and the tom doesn't sound very good, and just not working with the track, what usually winds up happening on a poorly tuned tom is that you'll have your fundamental frequency and there'll be an overtone that's right next to it, really close. So like the fundamental frequency on the rack tom is like, let's say 100. There might be another resonant frequency at like 105 or 104, like right next to it. If you notch that out, it'll make the tom speak a lot better. It's usually like two weird frequencies in a tom track that make it, basically that's the other reason why you shouldn't like edit out all the bleed on the tom tracks. If you solo the tom track when a tom isn't being played, you hear it ringing, you can hear all the frequencies that tom is tuned to, and you can hear the ones that are just not making it, and then you can you can just do a notch EQ and find it and pull it out. Then when you play the tom just sings.
Nice. Awesome. Let's see. So you mentioned having a manager as an engineer. Can you talk more about that and how it fit into your career?
Having a manager, if it's a catch-22. You can't get a manager unless you've got a track record, and having a
Mhm.
manager helps you get your track record, you know.
Right.
So I
Right.
was fortunate that like I was a staff engineer and worked on a couple of really big records. Um, and I'll be really honest with you. I was very naive when I picked my first manager. She was really good for me. Like she was with me when I did Soul Asylum and Weezer and stuff like that. But she turned out not to be a very good fit. I'll just like right after I'll give you, I'll tell this story. Like after the Weezer record had been out for a while, that summer I had like 2 or 3 songs in the top 20 in the alternative charts. I had like a Soul soundtrack and a couple of Weezer
Mhm.
tracks. And that summer, I think it was like about a month and a half where I had nothing. I had no work. I couldn't figure it out.
Hmm.
And friends of mine at record labels were telling me like, nobody really likes your manager. She's a real pain in the butt to deal with. I'm like, well,
Hmm.
nobody's supposed to like my manager. That's her job. She's trying to get me as
She's
much
supposed
money
to be
as
a pain in the butt.
possibly
Right.
can, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, all right,
Mhm.
but I'm telling you, well,
Hmm.
to cut what during this period where I got no work, I got a phone call. I got an answering machine message from Michael Brower, of all people. And I known Michael for a couple of years. He says, Chris, I got a gig for you. It's like the best gig in the world. It's going to pay you a fuck ton of money. You want this gig? Call me back. And I got the
Hmm.
message like 2 hours later. And I was like, yeah, man, I need to work. What's going on? He goes, I can't tell you now. I'm like, why? And he's like, well, I recommended you for this gig. You're fit in.
Mhm.
You fit right in on this gig. It's your gig. But when they found out who your manager was, they were just like, we don't care if he's Bob Clearmountain. We just refuse to deal with her.
Oh
Give me
wow.
later. And I was like, well,
Yeah.
who's the artist? And he's like, well, your manager knows the artist kind of a little bit, and not that I don't trust you, but if you tell her that you lost this gig, they're going to know that it was from me, and I don't want her calling
Hmm.
up the artist and yelling at them, blah, blah, blah. I'll tell you in a couple months when it's over. So a couple months go by, and I started working on something else, and I ran into Michael on the street, outside Electric Lady. I said, hey, man, so what was that gig? And that gig turned out to be Michael Jackson's History record, you know, and which like
Jeez.
all the extra tracks,
Right.
and that would have been like spending hanging out in the studio for like 2.5 months at like waiting for Michael to show up at 8 o'clock and working with him for
Right.
3 hours and leaving, and then that would have been like a $2,000 a day gig.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
picking a manager that people like is important.
Right.
Because I fired her immediately after that,
Yeah.
of course.
Right. Right.
um like
Oh my gosh.
I interviewed a couple of other guys who wanted to work with me, and my my next manager after that, they were like, well, we want to work with you, but you got to get rid of, you got to fire your old manager. So I fired her. I called them up right after. I was like, okay, good. I fired her. You got any work? And they're like, yeah, we're going to put you on a plane tomorrow and you're going to mix the new 311 record. So,
Oh man.
and I was with that
Okay.
company. I was with that company for like 20 years,
Yeah.
but a good manager, if I really want to, I probably could manage myself. But
Hmm.
for me, the main reason to have a manager is to have somebody else besides yourself to negotiate deals.
Right. Right.
Negotiate your rate, negotiate royalties if that's on the table.
Hmm.
Because if you're talking to a band and you start talking about how much you're going to pay me, this is what I want, all of a sudden like this glass window
Yep.
just slams down between you and the band.
Yeah.
All of a sudden it becomes this adversarial, like us and them thing, because it's a negotiation. I would
Yeah.
much rather have a manager and the band's manager in another room on the phone,
Yeah.
screaming and yelling at each other,
Yeah.
at each other's throats about what the deal is going to be, so you can just continue on doing nothing but being creative with the band that you're working with. And
Right.
that to me is worth the commission, that
Yep.
I pay my manager, which is about 15%.
Hmm.
Some people are less, some people are more. It's been 15%. And I'm on my third manager now. Well, actually, I've had more managers, but this is the one that I've been with for a while.
Yeah.
And it's a handshake. I don't have a contract with him at all. It's just a verbal
Yeah.
confirmation. This is how much our commission is. If I decide tomorrow that I don't want to work with him anymore, I can just walk away. But I'm
Yeah.
not going to do that.
Right.
And some managers are hooked into record labels. Some of them aren't.
Hmm.
I've been working long enough where the gigs just basically come to me, and I
Hmm.
just, when somebody asks me to work with them and they say, hey, do you want to make the record? I'm like, yeah, sure. So let's talk about money. I'm like, nope, don't talk to me about money. Talk to my manager.
Yep. Right.
And
Right.
and it's good to have that buffer. And sometimes, the buffer is really good. It protects you from things. Like I did. How can I tell this story without implicating anybody?
Right.
Okay, I did a record for a band, and it went way over budget by about 50, and they owed me about 15 grand. This is back in the 90s when like records had huge budgets.
Yeah.
And the label turned around and they were like, well, we didn't authorize you to get paid to work past this point. So we're not going to pay you this extra money. I worked for like an extra month or something like that. And they refused to pay the invoice. And so I talked to my manager. I was like, well, let's sue them. And they're like, well, no, we can't sue them because by the time it's all said and done, you're going to lose the money that you're making, yada, yada, yada. Let's just sit on it. We'll be able to use that later on down the road. And turns out later on down the road, my manager was managing an artist that the label wanted to sign, and it was a big multi-million-dollar deal, and the day before, they signed the contracts with this new artist, my manager sat down with the record label president and said, I'm really excited about signing this contract, but I don't want you guys to treat my guy like you did Chris. And the president was like, what are you talking about? He goes, well, you guys stiffed him out of 15 grand, 3 years ago on this invoice. You haven't paid it. And if you're going to do that to, my guy down the road, then I don't think we're going to sign this contract. The next day, 15 grand showed up in my fucking, bank account, because they lose this other thing. So managers can be really, really, really good.
Right.
So,
and it allows you to stay creative and not deal with
exactly. It's really worth it,
Yeah.
And and like I said, whether everybody's different, your comfort level will vary, but managers can be a good thing. Managers can't be. If you're comfortable negotiating your own stuff, then go right ahead and do it. Somebody was just recommended to me on my first manager was recommended to me, and the first year or two I was with her, it worked out great. But then things didn't work out, and I just moved on.
Right.
And I think any guy you interview on this site will probably tell you they've been with at least 3 or 4 different people. At a certain point.
Yeah. A lot of the people that are watching, like we hear about managers. This is myself included. I've never worked with a manager. If you're you're making records and you wanted to go down that road, do you have any tips for people who might want to try to find a manager? Things to look for.
Talk to if you know anybody else who has a manager, ask them who manages you, sit down with them, take a meeting with them. Even if they agree not to pick you up or whatever, like for example, like when that whole Michael Brower thing happened, I went to this A&R person that I worked with a lot, and I said, I'm looking for a new manager, and I've been talking to people. Here are 3 people that I'm thinking about going with. What do you think? They said, well, I never worked with this guy. This guy's pretty good. This guy, he's a bit of a jerk. Maybe you should talk to this guy. And he pointed out a different name. It was actually this company called AAM that I was with for like 19 years. And I was like, what about them? He said, well, they manage like Andy Wallace and Thompson Barbiero and Joe Barisi and all these other people. They're really good. I work with them all the time. Maybe you should give them a call. He said, better yet, let me call them for you. So here's the head of Columbia Records, A&R. He picked up the phone. He called these guys and he said, you should take a meeting with Chris. And I sat down with them and they were just like, look, we're full. We really don't want to take on any more people, but this guy says really good things about you. We're willing to add you, we'll squeeze you in, so we'll see what happens, and that's basically how I got, that manager, it's, you want somebody who has experience. You want somebody who's obviously managed other people, but before you can make that step, you have to be able to have a discography or a track record of your own that's worthy of being presented by a manager. You can't expect a manager to go to a major label and say, hey, I represent this guy, and he did 3 records with Joe Blow and the Nobodies in East River, Montana. The guys can go, whatever. So it's like in this culture, in this day and age, because I grew up like back when studios had staff engineers, and that's basically how you came up. In this world, it's a lot tougher. It's just a matter of building up a discography and building up mixes and things that you're super, super proud of, and just pounding the pavement.
Right. Awesome.
And if you're just starting out, don't say no to anything. In fact, go out and find gigs. Go to a club, your local club, and if you got your own studio, go to a club and look at the band and say, hey, I'll record 3 songs with you guys for free. I just need to get some experience under my belt. It may be a clusterfuck, because you're the first band I'm working with, but it's free. Come on, let's give it a go. And word of mouth gets out.
Yeah.
It's all about word of mouth,
Yeah.
And that's why having a horrible attitude, is just like the worst thing in this business. I've worked with so many people who have had horrible attitudes, and they wonder why they're not getting work. And it's like, dude, look in the mirror.
Yeah. Right. Right.
You know,
Nobody wants to be trapped in a room. Yeah. So.
it's a tough. The climate is really tough. Because
Mhm.
studios are going under. Everything's going to home studios. And you can't be
Mhm.
proud, like, yeah, I work for big name guys like Bob Dylan, but I'll do self-produced bands. If I got like a hole in my schedule and somebody calls me up and says, hey, I got a song and I've only got this much money to, for a mix, could you do it? And I'll be like, okay, yeah, sure, but I'll do it, but I got to fit it into my schedule, and
Yeah.
you're going to get 2 revisions at tops. You're not
Mhm.
going to get like a gazillion revisions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Right.
most people are fine with that.
Mhm. Awesome. Yeah. Well, Chris, we've kept you way over. I
That's
think this
fine.
might be our
I'll keep
longest running
going. I don't
one.
care.
So, thank you so much for doing this. Really, really appreciate it. And on behalf of everybody too, like, thank you for all your contributions to what we do and for all
Yeah,
the records that you've
rock
made.
on, guys. Um,
Yeah.
I had a great time. I have no problem. I love talking about what we do because
Yeah.
being able to make a living doing this, it's like the best thing in the world.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. It's
like,
definitely. Um.
that's why I tell my assistants, like, I'll be doing a session and everything will just like go south. And everyone, people are arguing, got nothing done that day, bands screaming at each other, fight breaks out, and everyone leaves. And I'm sitting there with my assistant. And the assistant will be like, "Oh God, what a horrible day." And I was like, "Yeah, but we're making records. Like
Right.
we could
Yeah.
be proctologists."
Right.
So,
Right. Right. No
so
offense to
that
any
I always look at
proctologists.
that anyway. So at the end of the
Yeah.
day, you're making music. So it's
Hmm.
awesome.
Yeah. Awesome. Great insights. Um, Well, tomorrow we're going to be back, everybody, with Andrew Sheps for 6 Geeks Apart. So,
Uh-oh.
yep, that's going to be Andrew diving into several songs that changed his life, followed by a question and answer session. And then on Friday, we have Friday Mix Day with Luca Predalesi, and he's going to be mixing a song in Studio One. So make sure you guys head back for that. All of the live streams are at 2:30 p.m. Eastern and 6:30 p.m. GMT. So cool. Chris, thank you again. Thank you for opening up this session for us. I'm
Thanks,
a
guys.
huge fan
Anytime.
of this band.
Anytime.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, we will see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Till next time.